Welcome to the Archangel's Feast podcast. A friendly reminder that I'm dividing the podcast into two different types. One where I sit down with someone and use their area of expertise as the sort of springboard for the conversation. And those are going to be the official channel podcasts. And I'm also still recording that's my phone, other just kind of bonfire cigar type chats with buddies. And I'm putting those in a separate folder on the channel called Squadcasts. This one was a full-up Squadcast. I grabbed my buddy Mike, and we talked about several things. This was really, really long. It turned into full Joe Rogan here. So, a lot of good things. We talked about chivalry and women in male offices. We talked about logos and forms and Plato. We talked about what we call G.K. Chesterton's sandboxes and kind of the role of rules in Catholicism. I'll kind of let you figure out what that means when when you get there. We talked about my whole theory. I bashed him over the head a little bit about my whole project of philosophizing about people's experiences. I'm really trying to philosophize more about why do people actually believe things, and are those reasons good reasons? Um, Instead of just trying to think in a vacuum, I'm really trying to have conversations in that way. And then we kind of ended by talking about social issues and race, because that's just what everyone's talking about now, in the kind of aftermath of the George Floyd and the riots, and kind of ended on the open-ended question of how much can hard work and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps actually solve intergenerational problems. Um, we were drinking, and my language got a little strong towards the end, but he took it in stride. All in all, it was a great time, and hope you enjoy. Thanks for tuning in. That makes sense.
Yeah, and there's just like a lot more to it. So, one of the things that's interesting is that there's like one part of the video where they talk about benevolent sexism, and what that means is like, okay, like for example, like when a man like treats a woman extra nice because they're a woman, that's like benevolent sexism, where like a man wouldn't hold a door, like theoretically, let's like holding a door is a bad example, but like a man wouldn't pay for the meal of another man, unless like there was some sort of circumstance around it, like maybe like for your boss or something like that, you might do that because you want to kiss ass to your boss, but like generally, if you're just with a friend, you're not going to do that. But like with a woman, you might do it.
Subservience to your boss.
Yeah. But like that is, so with a woman, you might do that even if you're not dating that person. You might.
What's the difference between benevolent sexism and chivalry?
That's exactly what it is. Okay. It's the same thing. Like the idea is like it's not like when I say benevolent sexism, it's not meant to be a stigmatizing way to say it. I'm just saying that like it's okay. You're not treating the sexes equally, but it's done for a good intention, And the idea is
okay. So here's an interesting idea that I think I'm going to start recording. So in case it gets juicy, in case it gets juicy, we don't have to do anything with it. But so there's something I've noticed, and this is a concept that I'm starting to apply when we're talking about gender relations, but also like race relations. And I'm starting to see this concept pop up, and it's the concept is small numbers of people can have big effects in someone else's experience. So what I mean by that is I'm in a male-dominated office right now, and so here's what I see, which is like maybe you have 50 guys and like a couple ladies in our area, right? So you can see that, and you can just see this where most of the guys are just normal and go about their normal workday and they treat men and women basically the same. Most of the guys do this. Then there's a few guys who are not socially calibrated, a few guys who are maybe insecure or just awkward or just creepy. Like the one creepy guy in the office is going to find the women.
I see.
So what's that like? Now think about what it's like to be the woman, right? So every day you go to work, you got to deal with the creepy guys, even though there's only two of them, right? So small numbers of bad apples can have a big impact for a minority in the office space.
Yes. Although to be fair, that could go for literally anything. That's literally the entire problem of all of humanity is, okay, like, this on paper seems fine, but there will always be bad apples that ruin everything. And that's kind of thing. Like, okay, in your office scenario, you've got a few creeps. And the idea is like, okay, if it wasn't for those creeps, then everything would be fine.
Right.
But
And there's a couple places you can go with this. So one is, how do you fix that?
Yeah. And
benevolent sexism. Like you've said it's chivalry. It's like, all right, let's get all the normal guys just to set this expectation of normalcy for everyone. Right?
Well,
let's just have all the normal guys just kind of all right, just to give an example.
I was actually I'll let you finish first.
All right, so just to give you an example of why I think this chivalry could work, which is one of the examples I have in my head of where a guy was making a woman uncomfortable. This is not something I saw. This is something I heard about from another woman I know, where there was one guy who was just super awkward, who, when he wanted to come talk to her about something, he wouldn't announce his presence. He would just kind of stand behind her and like kind of be in her personal space, and she wouldn't even know until she turned around and got freaked out, right? And this would make her very uncomfortable, obviously. Mm-hmm. And he didn't do this with guys, obviously.
Yeah.
So I think here's where chivalry can solve some of this problem, which is if another guy sees that, just be like, dude, what are you doing? Stop. Like, or give her a heads up that this guy's coming, like have someone else get your back in that situation, and that stops the thing from happening. That's
okay.
So that's what I mean by small numbers of people can have disproportionate effects, and chivalry can solve that problem. So
I see what you're saying. You're effectively saying, okay, because this group, and I'm trying to abstract it to a more general thing, because a group is being kind of like abused by a small fraction of your group, you need to kind of show some extra support to the minority group to kind of make up for it. Usually in the form of being like a watchdog, trying to deal with to prevent these bad eggs from ruining things. Taking the bad people and like trying to prevent them from being bad, and putting the what's it called, the expectation of that on yourself and the good people rather than on the minority group.
Yeah, and I don't even think of myself like, if I were to be the guy who calls out the other guy, I wouldn't even consider myself a watchdog. Like, that sounds like an extreme term. Even like, it's not an extreme term, but that sounds a lot more intense. I'd be just like, hey lady, this guy's coming to see you. Like, just heads up, so he doesn't surprise you. Or like, heads up, or if I talk to the guy, I'd be like, yo, that's actually like really making her uncomfortable. You shouldn't do that. Like, I could just say that like that, and it'd probably fix the problem most of the time.
Yeah, but my only perspective on that is along the lines of like, it kind of creates like a system of like, okay, you're kind of denying any sense of like independence to the minority group. You're kind of like, you're kind of going in and saying, okay, we need to regulate this encounter because in a kind of oppressive, arguably oppressive way, to prevent this kind of situation from happening. And this is, and the thing I would cite is like kind of like some of the people who are being like, or like those like creeps, they're not necessarily like, they might not necessarily be like evil to the core. They may just be like fools or idiots, or they don't know, they're
socially not calibrated.
Yeah, socially not calibrated. And the idea is you're kind of throwing the fear of God into them. You're kind of saying, you're kind of stigmatizing them as like a bad person, and rather than trying to educate them or perhaps let them educate themselves through learning by doing, you're kind of saying like, okay, I'm going to already assume that you're kind of like a lost cause, and I'm going to like be warning. And although of course I am dramatizing here to a bit, I'm just kind of like any degree
All right,
of
so
like oppression of an individual by saying like these individuals are bad and therefore we need to regulate them in any way concerns me, because then who determines who's bad and how? And it's like, is it just because the minority said so? Because how do you like determine like what's like, and like obviously like like the parallel being to the modern day and the modern situation is of course like police and minorities. Who says what a policeman's doing is wrong or right? The minorities could just all say like, okay, we just don't want any police at all, zero police, all police are bad eggs, and then the rest of us in society, do we just take it on fact that like, okay, all police are bad and we have to get rid of all of them? And that's kind of the thing, is like you have this kind of tug of war of like, okay, this group perceives these people to be bad eggs and is trying, and the idea is like, okay, it's on us to regulate these people, but then how do we know that who's actually a bad egg or not, and what should be done with the bad egg?
All right, so I think you're making an interesting point, which is, well, let me just see if I can address it. So I think you're right on the one hand, where if we don't have all the rules of the office space explicitly laid out of every behavior that we deem acceptable and every behavior that we deem unacceptable, that's too complicated. That's never going to happen, and you're right. And we have to leave it up to people's intuition. And then if we leave it up, like, so I can kind of steelman your point a little bit, which is if we're in an office space and the rules of engagement between people are left up to the intuitions of dudes.
Exactly. I just went to. It's like, okay, I work in the office. I just came to give a memo to Stacy, and then suddenly Chad comes over and goes, "Hold on a moment. What are you doing over to Stacy?" And I'm like, "I'm just giving a memo." And it's like, I don't know. I think you're being kind of creepy. I think you're going over for more than just giving a memo. And it's
all right. So, well,
and that's kind of the point.
Right. So let's say there's the hard problem and there's the soft problem. The hard problem is, what are the actual rules and can we explicitly lay them out? That's the hard problem.
Yeah.
And the soft problem is, all right, let's be honest. Most people, most of the time, are going to know that, hey, if I'm going up and standing behind this person and not announcing my presence, I think they know that, like, I don't do this to guys. Like, this is not a normal behavior. I know that most of the other people in the office don't do this. You can kind of, like, you don't have to call him out. You could just either give her a heads up that he's coming over, or, pull him aside and be like, dude, that's, like, I don't know if you realize that you're making her really uncomfortable. But just when you come over, wave or announce your presence. That's all.
Yeah.
Say, hey,
okay. I get that.
Or shoot her a message before you walk over. Just like let her know. You know what I mean? And so you can. So I think the soft problem is easier to solve, because I think 90% of the time it's solved by common sense that actually most people will have.
Yeah, that's basically, the soft problem is effectively a trivial thing where you're effectively saying, okay, most people understand what the rules of engagement are, at least on a tacit level, and just kind of, okay, whatever, like, it just sorts itself out. It gets self-regulated. So,
and so for the one guy who actually doesn't understand what the rules are, because he just doesn't know, you could, a lot of those guys, you could just explain to them what the problem is and then propose a solution. Hey, instead of doing this, do this. And it won't make her so uncomfortable. Like, most of those guys probably aren't trying to make people feel uncomfortable, and you could just explain it to them. And you might have to lay it out, because some guys are like that, especially like in tech. They're not filtered for social skills. You're filtering those guys because they're freaking nerds and good at it.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of those, I think you can solve 90% of the problem with chivalry. This is a long-winded way of saying that. Yeah,
I agree. Like I said, I think the hard problem matters, because what if the guy says, "I refuse"? Like, I'm like, for example, let's say that guy, like, who stands behind someone without mentioning the presence says, I disagree that I should, I don't think that there's any reason for me to do that. Why are you trying to regulate my behavior? My behavior is not violating any particular like written things. This person could say I'm creepy, but that's only basically if anything, that's a discriminatory measure against me, that she considers me creepy and wants to file me to HR. I'm not filing her to HR for whatever reason, and you get the idea. Is this kind of idea of like, if there's no written rule.
Well, anyone who hears that conversation is going to think he's an asshole. So that solves another 5% of the problems, because he becomes unpopular. He's going to figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that he has to stop. Like, he can do whatever the heck he wants. That's the kind of thing. It's like, and the rest of the population could be like, that guy's an asshole, but that doesn't mean he gets fired. That doesn't mean his behavior changes. And that's the point, is Stacy is still equally as creeped out as she always is. And this hasn't solved the problem, because that person can just refuse. That's why you need, that's why the hard problem actually matters. And yes, I agree that 90% of it is not going to matter. 90% of these people are going to be like, oh, is that how, the example I would give is my dad's a big boomer from Poland. So the jokes he makes do not make sense to most people. So he'll make some weird joke about some weird Polish movie he saw, or some weird 70s band that he listened to that nobody gets, and he doesn't understand the context of the situation, and it sounds weird. For example, he might make a joke about a monkey, and it might be perceived as a racial thing, even though he has no what's it called, intention of it being racial in any way. That's not how he perceives it. He doesn't know he's doing something wrong. But if you explain it to him, he'll be like, oh, I get it. Or, thanks for explaining it to me. I didn't realize what I was doing wrong. And he'll change his behavior. He won't make, weird jokes like that anymore, So, he'll try to avoid, perhaps, maybe he won't necessarily change his sense of humor, but he'll just avoid making jokes to that person who's feeling uncomfortable by it, Yeah. So, the idea then goes okay, yes, in 90% of cases that'll be fixed. That can be fixed just by a simple interaction. Mm-hmm. Because most human beings are rational. 90% of human beings can at least coexist in the basic society. The issue is always with the 10%, or actually I think it's the 80-20 rule is something else, but you get the idea.
That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah,
I said 90-10 because I'm just throwing out bullshit numbers, but
yeah, that 10% that doesn't follow the rules, that 10% that is unreasonable, the Karens, the radicals, the crazy people, the people who just do not
So this
want to adapt, change their behavior for the greater good. They just refuse. They have whatever thing in their head that they have to have, and they just refuse to change.
Now this isn't 10% of everyone. This is 10% of the problem child. So
yes, exactly. It's 10% of a 10%.
So I guess on the one hand, what I'd kind of like to see is I'd like to see at least something like this tried out, to just to run the experiment and see how much of the problem does it actually solve, and then does that create a world that's just good enough where we don't have to deal with the hard problem. Because the amount of times we have to deal with it, we're going to hope it's rare enough that it I guess doesn't matter. Just let's not worry about the 5%, 10% of problems that can only be solved by a hard rule enforcement. And even then, I think at that point you just got to define the rules in a vague enough. If you define the rules in a vague enough way, you kind of hope that people at the top have the common sense to recognize the situation for what it is.
Yeah,
and you can't always trust that. But
so
what else do we do?
Do
we have to write out all the rules of engagement? Do we have to do that between any interaction in the workforce? Do we have to explicitly write them all out? What else do we do aside from rules that are vague enough where we hope that common sense rules? So
I'm not sure about that. I don't know the answer to that question. I generally drift more so on the towards the side of explicitly writing things out.
Oh, me too. But I can't do this one.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to posit another example. So this is the idea of miscommunication. And so the idea is, let's say, let's say this chivalry system were in effect. What if I perceive someone to be a problem person who actually isn't? Or furthermore, what if one person, if there isn't a full commitment with the majority?
What do we do with all the false positives and false negatives?
Exactly, false positives, false negatives. So, and the idea is also the drama associated with that. Because suddenly, if I'm not a bad egg and someone accidentally calls me out, I'll be like, what a dick, he called me out. Like, and also, furthermore, the hijacking of the system by the bad eggs. So what if I'm the bad egg and I say, oh, I want to get the heat off me, so I'm going to be Mr. Nice Guy here and, like, totally, like, rat out or, like, like, claim everyone as being, like bad, like, I'm going to try to, like appear good even though I'm actually not. And it's funny because the example of this I give is the male feminist who's only in it to sleep with girls.
So what if you had a
subconscious level? Like,
what if someone you had a 2 or 3 strike system for?
At that point, we're just talking semantics. I'm like, you can add a whole legal system to it. That's what the court system in the world is for. That's why we have courts.
That's what the hard problem is, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of and that's basically my point is I think that the court system is needed. You always need a court system. You always need dispute arbitration. Like, you need that. Like, you can't just have a broad stroke system where someone says you did this and therefore you're bad. You need to have a method of redress. So, for example, like, with if someone files a complaint to HR about a guy who's supposedly creepy, like, that guy should have a way to be like, no, I'm not. Like, this is bullshit. This person doesn't like me for whatever reason and is just abusing me, And, like, there could be, like, a whole litigation system to, like, be like, okay, we're going to do investigation. We're going to do this. And we're going to figure out what's going on here. And who knows? Maybe he is a bad egg. In that case, if it can be definitively proved that this guy's an asshole and dick who's harassing people, then he could be removed and you can feel completely, like, secure in your knowledge, knowing that you did the fullest investigation possible to deal with this. And, like, when it goes into, like, politics and, like, philosophy and stuff, for me, it's like, for example, you have, like, situations like with the internet companies now. If I get banned from Twitter, I can't sue Twitter. So, like, no matter what, like, for whatever reason they can cite whatever regulation. They effectively have full control of arbitration. I can't go to a neutral party and say they illegally, like, or they unrighteously got rid of me on Twitter. Or they banned me on Twitter. So, and I'm making.
Have you gotten banned on Twitter?
No, I have not. I don't.
You're doing it wrong.
But yeah, and that's kind of my point. Is like, you have a lot of laws in place that basically say this group is protected from all forms of lawsuit for whatever bullshit reason.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know, maybe there is one group that's got it figured out. Like, maybe there is an actual, like, system that's in place that the rules are clear and the game theory works out that people don't try to fake things.
Yeah, well, that's why I like courts.
Maybe there is. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that seems to be the answer. Like, like we
that's my answer.
We can try and solve.
My answer is more courts, more lawyers. Like, legit. Like, it's funny because everyone calls lawyers, like, ambulance chasers and bloodsuckers and stuff like that. But I'm like, dude, those are the people who are able to fucking save your ass when some bullshit happens to you. You need them to basically litigate for you, because I can feel slighted by whatever bullshit, but if I can't sue, then there's literally nothing I can do about it.
Also true.
All forms of all justice is through the courts. Like,
yeah.
Like, that's why I'm like, with the, like, especially, like, just to bring things back to current events, like, with the whole, like, cops killing people, like, fucking sue their asses, take them to court, prove that they're murderers.
I think
like,
I think in an office space, though, you probably have enough witnesses where people can...
Witness testimony is inaccurate. Like,
yeah, but I think there's a kind of luxury with the office space when you kind of put enough people in the same place at the same time, and again, assuming that most of the people are just normal and want just a nice workplace for everyone, just assuming that, you probably have enough people who say, like, look, here's this one guy who's out of line. We don't want to slaughter him for it. You know, he probably doesn't have everything figured out. And I've been there, so it's like, we don't have to slaughter this guy, but just like, just let him know, hey, I don't know if this is like a trial by jury kind of thing might actually be really effective in a workplace. Again, assuming that most of the people are normal and just want to have a good workplace.
Yeah, it's basically at this point, I think we've kind of gotten to the point where it's like it's informalization or formalization of the same process. Effectively, the idea of your chivalry example is effectively, okay, the collective of quote unquote rational people will decide if someone is violating some sort of like expectation of them or unwritten law, and they can dish out warnings, reprimands, very basic informal means of punishment or litigation as a result, but inevitably you need the hard formal process for the edge cases.
Well, maybe. So there might be a backdoor way through this. Maybe this is the artificial intelligence version, which is if you have a group, and let's say you poll your group every quarter or something, and you ask them how it's going, and if people aren't satisfied, maybe just you could fire the leaders of that group, or replace them, or rotate them out. And maybe you could have a sophisticated enough polling system that doesn't incentivize people to lie, but that might be a backdoor way to not have explicit policies, but that puts leaders in place. Again, assuming that maybe a leadership change can cure the problem.
Yeah, like you could theoretically find a democratic way to do it like that, but democracy has its own problems, which that's a whole other discussion at that point.
United States doesn't know anything about that.
Yep, we're a republic.
Right. So we don't know anything about it. What's been on your mind lately? You've been chewing on anything? That's a total cold call, by the way.
Yeah. I'm what's it called? So have you ever? Do you know what's called corpus hermetica is, or hermeticism?
I think I did at one point. Rings a bell.
Oh, hold on. I've got a book.
Do it. Hermes. Is this Greek mythology?
Kind of. So this book, the text of this book was originally written in Greek. Sometime the latest that we've found, the earliest that we've found it so far, is around the 3rd century AD. So after Jesus, but
That's
what's
a
it
copy.
called? This is just a copy. Yeah, this is the translation by Mead. There are like 3 translations that are commonly used for this, and the idea is.
That's how you know you got your PhD, by the way. This is a translation by Mead. That is only a phrase that a PhD would use.
Yeah,
This is a translation by this person.
Well, I like this translation because they use the other, like for example, this one uses logos. Logos matters a lot when you're dealing with anything Greek philosophy, and this one uses it.
What do you mean uses logos? You mean
logos is a Greek word that has an incredible amount of meaning, but there are a lot of translations to Greek texts that replace it with just the term word. So, for example, the Gospel of John is oftentimes the first paragraph is what's called
the word became flesh. And
the word, the word. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh, etc. That's inaccurate. The logos.
Did I just totally cite the wrong gospel intro? I think I did. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, but anyway, logos is the more correct word. And the idea of logos is meant to be more, I would argue a more correct English translation would be the idea of form/concept. So
meme.
If you know
the meme the meme with the capital M.
Yeah, well,
the meta meme.
Kind of. So if you know anything about I think it was Aristotle or Plato with forms.
Yeah, the cave.
I think it was Plato. Well, the idea is let's say I have a can.
Oh, that's right. You're a big Plato fan.
I love Plato.
Yeah.
So if you have a can, there's this specific can I'm holding in my hand. This is one kind of can. Mm-hmm. But there are other kinds of cans. There's this can. This can's slightly taller. But what makes these cans is certain aspects about them. So first off, they're made of metal. Well, to be a can, it has to be metal. And then there are also certain can-ness aspects to it. Like, for example, being able to pierce through the metal to make these holes or whatever. The tab is a can concept, Mm-hmm. And the idea is these concepts lie in the supernatural. These concepts are with God. Because if all cans in the universe were destroyed, the concept of a metal can still exists in the ethereum.
Actually, it was funny because you said metaphysical. My brain, while you were talking, my brain actually went to a totally different space, which is, I think if you had to ask people what makes a can, most people probably wouldn't be able to articulate it very well, just cold calling them. That seems like something that's evidence that it's been baked into their long-term memory.
Yeah.
Right, where it's just a Lego now. It's like a Lego block that we have now, and we're not worried about the details of the Lego block. We don't care about the polymers that it's made of. And
we don't care about the why. We just care about the
we just
what.
care about it's a Lego block and what can I use it for.
Yeah. So I remember we were talking a long time ago, I think it was in our first podcast, about roads. About what is a road? We don't need to know, and I forget the context of what we were talking about. I would have to re-listen to the podcast.
I think that was materialism.
Yes, and actually I was talking the same thing. That the concept of a road is ethereal, and it is non-materialistic. Because all roads in the universe can be destroyed, but the concept of a road would still exist. Therefore, there has to be a metaphysical, ethereal reality. That was my thesis.
Yeah. I can't decide on whether I want to push back or whether I want to take the interesting thing in that and run with it.
Well, I know, if I remember correctly, and now it's coming back to me, yeah. You were talking about language, about how it relates to materialism. And the idea is, we have like physics and stuff as a certain language, and then like, but the thing is we have higher orders of language, and they don't necessarily reduce to each other. So, for example, like certain Maxwell's equations don't reduce to each other or something like that.
Holy shit! You remembered my core idea. Wow.
I'm surprised that I remembered it, especially after a beer. But
so I guess there's two things to say, which is, and instead of going up, let's go side to side. When you're dealing at the substrate level of all these memes or all these Legos or all these forms, whatever you want to call them, I think about it as a Minecraft sort of quantum universe, where your universe has these building blocks, and if you're a Minecraft player or a user, you don't go deeper than the block. The block has its properties as a block, and you use that to manipulate the world and understand the world, and that's what makes up your world. But you don't really care about the source code underneath the block.
Yeah.
And that's the way I'm thinking about these forms, and we live in a world of forms, and it's like these forms are baked. Whether you think they're metaphysical or whether you think they're baked into our long-term memory and it's just a scientific thing, either way, I think what we're both observing is that we have these what's irreducible building blocks of our universe. And it's like, the question is, what does the irreducibility mean for the universe? So the fact that I can't reduce this form into its substrate, that you can ask the question, does that mean it's a supernatural thing because it's irreducible? Or does that mean it's just baked into my long-term memory and maybe it does have reasons, or do I just not be able to articulate them?
Well, there is some truth. I like what you're saying there, because let's say go back to the can example.
Yeah.
It's made up of metal sheets that are shaped, So, okay, at that point you could say, this isn't a can anymore, it's metal sheets that are shaped. So this is just a conglomeration of metal sheets, and then I could theoretically reduce that to metal atoms and everything. But the idea is, how do I differentiate this from a cup? Well, it's the lid. It's its capacity to store liquids without spilling them, and then also be opened. So that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is like that you have to, when you get to higher forms of reasoning, you get forms. The can is a form that is associated with qualities that can be ephemeral, meaning that you can design a can in many different ways, but they are all cans from many one, and as above, so below. So, when the form of a can as above is how it is in the material world, so below. So, that is the core of, basically Platonic philosophy, is that, if I were to change this can, it would no longer be a can. And that is the point.
Can you expand? Can you expand on that? On the one becoming the many.
So the idea is, it's one form of a can become many different iterations of can. So I've got can 1 here, can 2 here, can 3. I can go all day pulling out different cans.
That's the many.
And then the one is the singular form of can that unites them all, that makes them all can. And that's related to Jesus. Jesus is in Christian
Sorry, I appreciate how out of left field that was. I love it.
Well, that's just how I work. But the idea is, Jesus is
logos.
The logos, the form. Basically, he is the basically the prime originating form of everything. He is the origination of all concept and form to begin with. that's kind of the point. It's
All
like
right, so how do I
and I just before I get into explaining the details, this basically talks about that in a very esoteric way, but it also states that God is the Trinity is made up of the three aspects, or in this case, the Hermetics believe more so in a duopoly, but a duality rather than a trinity. But basically, the idea is there's the passive and the active. The passive is the mind. The logos is the active creation and force.
Yeah, right, so you're kind of touching on my question.
And then the Trinity to Catholics is basically, okay, you've got God, which is more like the mind, the passive. You have the Holy Spirit, which is the active, the emanation. And then you have Jesus, which is kind of like in the middle, the intermediary, the kind of the dualities becoming one. So that's why Jesus is both human and God. He's both. Like he's like it, and that's kind of Trinitarianism in a very imperfectly explained way.
All right, so this is just me talking. Where I would balk at this, just personally, is how do I distinguish between your whole concept of forms and your whole matrix for talking about forms? How do I distinguish that the forms are forms just a way of organizing concepts in our brains, or do they cause things to happen? Or is that the wrong question to ask?
So forms don't cause, so I'm not gonna, that's a tangent, because that's when you get into what I call angels and demons, and that's concepts that have active force in reality. But that's a whole tangent. But before we get into that, forms are concepts. They're the same. It's just which terms you use. A lexical distinction. Okay, you can call them a form. You can call them a concept. They're interchangeable. I can say the concept of a can versus the form of a can. Form generally it does imply more of a spatial aspect to it, 3D space, but that's not intended. That's I think that's a product of translations of Plato's work from Greek into English. I think they use the term form, which may be inaccurate, but
let me speed you up a bit. Psychology agrees with this. We have in psychology, you have a concept called schema, and we organize all of our thoughts and ideas in this org chart of, you have a bunch of things at the bottom, and then a few.
My perspective is the org chart is divine. Yeah. That's kind of my that is the kind of the leap there is. You could say that it's not divine; it's completely material, and that it's just But I'm that the idea is you can't I don't know how you could characterize that as something that is not outside of it, because the idea is if the entire universe were destroyed, every atom were destroyed, that doesn't negate the existence of these concepts. That's my distinction there. Therefore, they are outside of the material reality and must therefore be supernatural in some way.
So this is a tangentially related question, but what if aliens had a different org chart from us? Which one would be right?
Both. Both would be right. Because the idea is because the first thing is first off, I assume.
But if they exist independent of the universe, how do you square that?
So all right, let me first talk about one thing. So first thing, I assume you don't mean that they just have different words for things, because obviously this is a can to me, and the idea is I would assume that my perspective is I believe in convergent evolution, so I think if we did find aliens, they would also see this as a can. They'd be able to organize this in their thought. This isn't I think it's practically impossible for them to have gone to space flight without ever achieving at least this form of organization.
Let me give you a hard example.
But I want to let me finish my thought. They could be existing. They could have forms of perception that are outside of our own. And so the idea is they for example,
No, I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that.
I'm kind of going to the point of like, okay, then you get to things like infrared sight and even things that we may not have ever heard. Okay.
Right, so here's what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is, and this will probably stretch your brain even more, but like, if you're in a social situation, like let's say I'm talking with my family, and let's say it's me, my brother, and my sister, and my brother says something, and my sister reacts by getting angry, and I react by not controlling my feelings and trying to understand where he's coming from and trying to de-escalate, right?
So you would react with understanding.
Yeah, and let's assume this is the perfect controlled experiment, because obviously, like, if I were to come under a certain pressure, like if I'm talking with my boss or I'm talking with my advisor, like I've been in stressful situations, where I'm talking with my academic advisor, and he said something that like indicated we were totally talking past each other, and he said something kind of extreme that was like, maybe I shouldn't be your advisor. Like, I heard that phrase come out of his mouth, and I realized I like panicked, my blood pressure went up, and like I didn't know what to do, but I controlled my, I thought about it for like a couple seconds, and I realized where our disconnect was, and I addressed that, and we had a good conversation. I could totally imagine another universe where I was a different person, and I reacted to that in a bad, destructive way, and I freaked out, and I looked for a different academic advisor. So what I'm saying is those are actually contradictory forms in my head. I'm tying this back into your theory of forms, because I think it's similar to my psychological idea of schemas, where we have just different, I don't know, maybe different applications running in our operating system. And when I'm in this kind of stressful situation, I trigger this one application, but in the same situation, if I was a different person, I would have behaved a different way. And I think that indicates an actual contradiction at the level of forms between my brain and my alternate universe brain.
Okay, so I get what you're saying, is that you have the same inputs, but you have different outputs. And therefore, the black box system, that is the forms, isn't consistent.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I tried to give a very real example, but
yeah. So my issue is along the lines of this. I disagree with your notion of having a perfectly controlled experiment in that scenario, and the idea is there's something not being taken into account there. So you may feel stress in one example, but something was slightly different in the other example to make things different. And also is the concept of probability and statistics.
All right, so I see where you're going with
that's
this.
The other thing is basically there could be somewhere in the cosmos of your brain a coin flip happening. And it doesn't have to be a pure coin flip. It's not necessarily 50-50. Where in one way you could be acting one way or another. And this is and the point I'm trying to get to is this eventually gets to the concept of determinism. Is every reaction you have perfectly associated, or is there a concept of something being completely like irrationally connected? And is that connected by a probability distribution? Is it connected by just something abstract? And that's the thing, is and the one interesting thing that I wanted to get to that is there is a possibility that it is not probability, that it is not determinism, that there could be an outside thing, and this is what's effectively God. There could be a decision-making force outside of this reality that makes decisions, and its decision-making is completely arbitrary and not subject to any randomness or not subject to any sort of decision-making apparatus that we can fathom. And that is kind of if anything, that proves my concept of form more, because it proves more so that there is a divine existence outside of everything. Like the idea is, if my forms are inconsistent, then that generally means that there has to be something divine that is inconsistently applying the forms.
Yeah. Okay, so we're having the conversation at two different levels here. On the one hand, what are the forms, and then on the other hand, what's the consistency behind the forms?
Yes,
what's the logos?
That's kind of the point. And
okay, so hold on. Before we get to the logos, I kind of want to explore a little bit more real quick. So I actually think that people have totally different forms in their heads, which are not consistent with each other. I actually think that.
Do you mean like cognitive dissonance?
I mean, like, I genuinely think
like hold on, let me just give you a quick example, just so that way I can have this answer your question. So I was gonna say, do you mean like, okay, I like sweet things, but not this sweet thing, so therefore that's an inconsistency? Or do you mean like, okay, I believe in freedom, but not in the case of this thing, so I'm like you get what I'm saying? Like, do you believe, like, is that what you're kind of trying to say of cognitive dissonance, or are you trying to say that like a different kind of inconsistency?
Actually, I would like to hear your thoughts on cognitive dissonance. I wasn't even thinking along those lines. I was thinking more along the lines of actually different people having totally different conceptions of what it means to live in this world. And
their labels may be wrong, but their labels may be the same, but the forms are different. That's my that's a very quick answer that I can give. So the idea is,
actually, I don't think so.
Yeah. And so the idea is, like, I say this is a can, and then I don't know. Let's say someone says this is a can, and the idea is like, well, how are they different? And it's like, well, they're the same. They're relatively the same shape. It's imagine like it was the only difference was plastic. And I would say, that can't be a can, it's not made out of metal. And then he would say, it's still a can, it doesn't have to be made out of metal. And the idea is the form is different. Because
let me be more explicit.
It's like the label of a form is not universal. It's just that, like, the concept is one person has not extended the concept of it being metal to their form of a can, to their label of a can, than the other one has. So that's one.
Right. I guess what I'm saying. All right. No one disagrees on the concept of a can. Let's say you had someone who was raised in a non-religious household, and they decided to get baptized, and then they decided not to invite the family to the baptism. There's one parent who says that kind of makes sense because we wouldn't go anyways. There's another kind of parent who says that's a threat. So it's not someone saying this is a can and this is a lid. It's someone looking at the same situation saying this is a threat versus this is a this is just, it makes sense.
So first off, I want to say that your example there is really bad, and the reason why is it's too abstract. There's too many, or it's too complicated. I mean, there's too many different things going on in that example to decompose and dissect. And that's why it sounds a little redundant why I keep using the can example. But the can example is specifically chosen because it is so simple that the axioms can be very simply explained and dealt with. So the idea is a reaction. Okay, so what do you mean by a psychological reaction? Do you mean the chemicals that are going through my brain? Do you mean the more metaphysical aspect of it? Do you mean like the idea of aggression? Like there's so many aspects to reactions, psychological reactions and emotions that are so complex that it's incredibly common that people get labels mistaken on these forms of emotions and reactions. So, for example, someone's anger can be seen so someone's anger in one example may not be the same as someone else's definition of anger. So those are two different forms. They're very similar, but one form of anger there does not does not have a certain quality that the other one has. And so the idea is those two forms exist independently of each other. They're similar, but they're independent. In the same way that a freaking cup is similar to a can, but they are fundamentally different. But in another world, I can just call them both containers, you know. And despite the fact that they have different qualities, there's I'm using the same label for them. And that's that's the biggest problem of all, like, I think, misunderstanding. That's literally the definition of misunderstanding, is people labeling things that have a certain meaning incorrectly, or disagreeing upon the definition of labels. So, like, the idea is, like, the funny aspect there is, like, you eventually you do get to the point of Bill Clinton in the frickin' Monica Lewinsky trial saying, that depends on what your definition of the word is. Because is also an incredibly difficult concept to describe. And that's the problem, is, like, we take shortcuts in language where we can generally say, oh, I generally acknowledge what you're trying to get at when you're using this word. But this word can also mean something else in a different context. That's why you have the word plus the context it's in. And the idea is forms go backwards from that. They go completely backwards to the point of, forget language. We're just talking about the actual existence, the actual truth to what is happening there.
All right.
So
I think philosophically we struck gold here, because we're getting really into this. But All right. So I think I understand what you're saying. Where in my example, when I said this person interprets this situation as a threat and this person interprets the situation as normal, there are two separate forms which don't contradict each other, and people are just psychologically. Right, this isn't an attack on the forms, which I think, which I was claiming it was.
Yeah, it's not. Their reactions are completely different due to various circumstances.
One person saying this is a cup, and another person saying this is a lid, and you can have cups and lids, and they don't contradict each other. We're just calling it different things and reacting differently because of that.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That doesn't attack the forms.
But there is an actual truth of what this is. But there also, it depends on my own vision of it. So, for example, if I only saw an infrared and I couldn't fathom 3D space, or something like that, then the concept of a can might be foreign to me. And different things may fall into umbrellas that don't make sense anymore, is kind of the point.
All right, so I guess my theory of human psychology would be,
your experience changes the form of your reaction into a very unique and different thing. However, it can be compared to other similar reactions.
Yeah, I was actually going to go on a whole tangent about how can we have biological machines that actually do that, but that's too too much. But I think people go through life and they form hierarchies of organizing information based off their experiences and based off their biology plus experiences. And so after I go through 20 years of life, the org chart that I have is actually going to look different from the org chart you have, and because of that, we're going to react differently in the same situation.
Yes,
that's not.
But there's but the point is that I have an org chart and you have an org chart, but the universe has an org chart. That is the logos.
Okay, yeah, I think that's where we agree, because at the end of the day, there's objective. There has to be objective processes which bring that about.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And that, yeah. And a huge part of religion is trying to figure out what or at least
what the processes are.
A big process of Plato's ideology was trying to figure out what the true org chart of reality is. Because if we can all find that true org chart of reality, we can suddenly avoid so many problems of miscommunication, of evil and good and intentions and all these other things, and we can become better people.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we're not talking past each other, I guess another way of putting it would be, um, well, we're not talking past each other anymore, and this is just quickly becoming a normal discussion from ground zero about materialism. But like, you ever heard of the what's I forget his name. It's a computer scientist. The game of life, where you have a grid, like your piece of grid paper, except it's a
Yeah.
program, and each block is either on or off.
Oh, I think I know. And they have like a certain relationship, and then these shapes start to form, where
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you have
So
like
if
these
you have
flutterers, like you have these like
Yeah.
wigglers, and that, and because of the rules he applied, these kind of like life forms appear.
Right. And so I guess my question, I guess the dumb question at the end of the smart conversation is, can simple material rules generate all this complexity? Because you're taking
My
this concept
perspective. So my perspective is that the material rules are a form that was also supernatural. So the idea, and also furthermore, the idea is the fact that these forms are created as a result of the material reality is part of the like order, the logos. So the idea that like effectively when that guy created that simulation, he was God and he put those rules there. That's his logos, like is his order of like how, and then these things formed out of the logos. And like the only difference is that he's not omniscient. He didn't know that those forms would appear in that way when he created those rules. But the idea is, you also have to keep in mind, he didn't create the computer that made those. He didn't create the actually, that's no. Sorry, let me back up there for a
Well,
moment.
we're kind of talking in analogies now. I think we're kind of getting out of our wheelhouse of, of what we know.
I guess that's a better question. There is God truly omniscient, and that's a whole question. That's a whole talk. Does God have to be omniscient to be able to create the universe?
Or can he set the simple rules in motion which create complexity?
Exactly. Like maybe he just said, okay, I'm going to flick these switches this way, this way, this way, this way, and then everything that happens is just out of, like, I had no idea what would happen. Like, did God actually know that human beings would form out of the way he set up reality, or was that a happy mistake or a happy accident? Like, and that's something that I don't think we'll ever be able to objectively prove, but we can go into a philosophical tangent about that, about like, what is it like? Is it necessary? Could he have done this? Could he have done that? And yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah, it gets super philosophical super quick. I think that's why when I talk about God, I think I've actually like, unless all right. So if you think that there's a way to break out of that, kind of philosophically or scientifically, then I'd love to hear it, and that's great. But I think I can't personally do that. Like, I can't come out of this closed system of the simple rules and how they generate complexity, because I see that, and then I have a hard time abstracting out God as a person from that. If I just look at this whole idea of the simple rules, but I think when I think about when I come at this not from a cups and metal and lids perspective, but when I come at it from, let's organize an org chart based off human experience, and I get psychological schema hierarchies, which have to do more with ethics and science and kind of the soft stuff. But when I do the legwork and I do the org chart for that stuff, I think I have a better chance of coming out with God at the top than I do with the cups and the nuts and the bolts and the roads, and the matter and the energy. And
Yeah, well, the idea is I'm reliant on things that people who didn't understand physics to the same extent we do have. So, like, this book was written in like 200, like at 200 AD or earlier, or like the 3rd century or earlier.
so you, with your PhD in
Like-
engineering, are you not imposing, but you're doping that with your modern science?
Yes, that's kind of the point. And even with my PhD, I'm like, I don't know everything. There's stuff that I don't know. Like,
oh, really? Wait,
and-
PhD doesn't give you
yeah.
omniscience?
So, like, the idea is fundamentally, I can't take into account all the aspects of the universe when I make my theories. That's why they will forever be theories, and that's kind of the reason why, like what they call like gravity a theory. The idea is it's an accurate description of all form of the force of gravity, but we can't objectively prove that it's universal, that all matter exerts gravity.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we haven't been able to disprove it yet.
Mhm.
So it's one of those things where gravity's pretty settled science. Everyone generally acknowledges and believes in gravity.
But that's from a superabundance of evidence, not from proof.
Yes. But that's but that's why it's so called a theory. All like philosophy and theology, in my opinion, is generally going to, or anything related to the supernatural is a better way to put it, is generally going to be a theory, because and we can blame Descartes for that, because everything we know could be just a manipulation of a demon, or we're brains in jars or whatever. We can never objectively prove that. So that's kind of the point. It's like you have to eventually get to points where you're like, okay, this is a pretty closed system. I haven't checked every single gap that may exist in reality, but it's good. It's pretty darn good.
You're just about as good as your axioms at this point. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's how most religions and theology and philosophy has gone throughout all of time. And then what'll happen is, naturally, someone will be like, I don't like this. Let me see if I can find one of those gaps. And then they'll think and they'll think and they'll think, and they might find a gap. They might be like, hey, your organization of this is flawed because of this particular example, and this is actually an important example that this doesn't work. So for example, morality, like everyone disagrees on what's good and bad, because we could I could say, oh, life is sacred, and then I could be like, okay, what counts as life, and everyone suddenly gets into a tizzy saying okay, this counts as life but this doesn't, and does my computer count as life or not? When does AI get to count as sentient, and things like that? And the idea is there are always gaps that we just don't know.
All right, so here's a good.
I generally lean towards the more encompassing side. So usually what I tend to say is okay, I would rather think my computer is a living creature than think that not all life is sacred.
Yeah,
that's kind of my logic when I deal with kind of fringe examples that have generally been inserted by modern day things.
So I tend to be more interested on the flip side of this coin, which is as let's say, as a Catholic culture, as just a bunch of Catholics collectively thinking together, have we just psychologically wedded ourselves to let's say concepts that are oversimplified, or have we so one example, stupid example, but holding your hands when you pray the Our Father at Mass, right? I know a lot of that kind of became a Catholic I don't know, drama.
that's so that's a tradition, right? But that's it. Nowhere does the catechism say that it's a sin not to hold your hands, right?
Right. I guess the point is, I know a lot of people who
that's kind of the more that's the distinction, is because people have traditions where they say you should pray in this way, you should do this in this way, you should do it this way. You should pray the Our Father. You should pray the
I guess
Hail
all right. So the
Mary.
question is how
But
much is
like, there's a question of
the question I'm really driving at is how much has God let the church do the 80-20 rule?
what do you mean?
What I mean is, all right. I guess I'll stick with the hand holding analogy, just just to tease out the idea. The idea is not that it's does well. Maybe that is the idea. So when people say you're allowed to hold hands during the Our Father, that's one side of the debate. The other side of the debate is we're actually going away from tradition and we're at risk of a Protestant infiltration in the church, or something like catastrophic,
Okay,
slippery
so
slope. So I
by
guess what I'm
the
saying is, on the one hand, half the people who like holding hands at the Our Father are psychologically married to something they like, and another half of the church is, let's say, they're not psychologically wedded to the alternative, but they're kind of getting themselves off when they think they're the watchdog of the church. And I guess what I'm saying is this seems to be a low resolution way of sense making.
So finish your train of thought, and then also I need to use the bathroom.
Yeah, same actually. Another way. All right, so maybe another way of putting this very briefly is G.K. Chesterton would ask the question, "What are the laws? And once I follow all the laws, what's everything else I can get away with?" And I think in a lot of ways the church overcompensates by I don't know. I don't have evidence for this. This is just an intuition I have, or maybe a question I have is the church overcompensating because we don't believe no one's a walking catechism where no one has all the rules explicitly in their head. We kind of have our intuition of what this all is.
Yeah,
and how low resolution is that?
All right, so we'll get into that after a bathroom break.
Yeah, I gotta refill and pee. Oh, did you just get back?
Yep.
Perfect timing. All right, we're back.
Yep.
What are we talking about?
Okay. Yeah. So we were talking
GK
about the
Justice
idea
sandboxes.
of GK casters and So
Yeah.
okay. So the idea is like if we have like a certain degree of laws, and I think the Catholic Church has a good hold on that. And what that basically is we have the distinction of mortal
the Catholic
sin.
culture. When you say the Catholic Church, are you talking about Catholic culture at writ large, or are you talking about?
I'm talking about the catechism, the official documents, the catechism,
the tradition. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So what that means is basically we're what's called we have mortal sin. So that basically says if you do this, this is like we like fucked up, and it's a very clear delineation. Like this is straight up sin. You're sinning. This is like highly, highly likely going to send you to hell. Like, don't do this. And the idea is we have like the Ten Commandments, and we have like the what's it called? Everything else that like has been like separated from the Bible.
By the way, just to add some gravity to this, I tend to see this conversation as the meta conversation for a bunch of other conversations. One of those is gender.
Yeah, so there's this mortal sin, and then there's also venial sin.
Yeah.
And the idea is like drinking a beer. Like I argue, like according to Jesus, like if I want to be a perfect human being like Jesus, I wouldn't drink. But I like drinking, so I do it. It's like I'm effectively making a very minor sin where I'm effectively saying there's an aspect of perfection that I could be achieving that I've voluntarily chosen not to out of my human weakness.
All right, two things you're saying. One is the striving for perfection, which is, let's say, a positive, and then there's avoiding negatives.
Yes.
Right, so you're saying not drinking beer would be in the spirit of the law.
Yeah, and well, the idea is, and then by going against the spirit of the law, I'm committing a venial sin.
Sure. I don't know. I don't know how many theologians would sign up for that, but I see what you're saying.
Mm.
Neither of us are theologians, if you couldn't tell.
Yeah, I'm an engineer. I can tell you how to make a targeting algorithm, but not. I can only do my best to tell you how to live your life.
I can tell you how to beat tic-tac-toe. Never lose. Yeah,
you can never like if both players play optimally, it's a draw every time. But anyway, what was I going to say though? It's like, okay, yeah. So the idea is the church, like when you talk about like the hand-holding thing, the idea is who determines the quote-unquote spirit of the law? Who determines what is like the tradition and what determines an acceptable deviation from the tradition?
Who determines the rules of the workplace?
Yeah, and so the idea is, on one hand, you have straight up the church. The church, like the Pope and the cardinals and the organization, the bureaucracy of the church straight up tells you, hey, this is how the mass is to be run. You have to do it this way. Like for example, marriage, like for example, with like priests being celibate, like marriage in itself is not a sin, but it can be sinful if you're doing it as a priest. And then of course there's a lot of like legalism there, and so the church has things that are considered traditional that you should be doing, like this is how you do the mass, this is how you're supposed to pray, doing the Our Father, etc. But the idea is like then there are the gaps, things that the church hasn't gotten to yet or doesn't care about. So the idea, so a better way to put that is the Catholic Church has a specific grace prayer. But what if I want to say grace my own way? I don't think the church has ever really said anything bad about that.
Well, I think there's even juicier stuff to talk about, which is like, what if I'm a Catholic parent with a gay kid? How do I deal with, like, how do I navigate that? Or how do I have a bunch of friends who are scientific atheists from tech school? Like, how do I navigate those relationships? There's no guidebook for that. Like there's a lot of soft like it's the soft problem which we don't have a hard answer for.
Yeah, and like
And it's not
actually,
just saying
I just want to get into that. It's like, okay, like with the reaction, like, okay, let's say you have someone who's an atheist around you, like, okay, how are you supposed to like deal with them? Do you tolerate their existence and try to be nice to them and hope that they'll come to you, or do you try to be more aggressive? Do you try to directly evangelize? How aggressive do you go? Like, for example, if you have a gay friend, do you straight up tell them you're going to hell, or do you try to understand them and try to like do that? And like that's a big part of the New Testament is like I think it was John or not Saint the one who Saint Paul, I think. Yeah, he basically told you like when you're with the Jews, be like a Jew. When you're with the Gentiles, be like a Gentile, etc. So the idea is generally the church tells you to be kind of like intelligent and like understanding about it. Like try to fit in with the culture around you.
Where in the New Testament do you see the words intelligent and understanding?
Like that's the thing is like that's something that maybe I've incorporated in there. The idea is they tell you to imitate, and imitate is a better way to put it. Like, and that's kind of the point. Is like there will always be gaps, and I could say this is the spirit of that text, and they might say this is the spirit of that text, and fundamentally, it goes back to the whole workplace thing. It's like okay,
the
let's
80-20.
say, yeah, it's like okay, 90% of it's going to resolve itself fine, but let's say I'm that guy who goes to the
resolve
north.
Itself fine if people are acting in good faith.
Yeah, let's say I'm that guy who goes to the frickin' North Sentinel Island because I need to preach to them about Jesus, and and like let's say as there's the church has an opportunity to straight up tell me like don't do that, you're gonna infect them with disease and do all this other crap, like that's bad, don't do it. And that's the thing is they have to have a legal system like a court to basically tell if I'm like so dead set on spreading Jesus to the uncontacted islanders, they have to have a legalistic system to prove to me and to prove to the rest of the world that what I'm doing is wrong and I shouldn't do it.
So I guess my problem is,
and therefore be justified in stopping you.
I guess my problem is I could come up with some pretty good guidelines. Let's just say let's just hypothetically if you're a Catholic who has a bunch of atheist friends, I could come up with some pretty good guidelines for how to navigate those conversations and those relationships that I've never heard from anyone else. And I don't like that. I don't like the fact that I had to invent the wheel. And I don't know if I'm just bitching.
Yeah, I think that's something that's not taught. That's like one of the big major disconnects with the Catholic Church and I would say the modern youth is that there's not a lot of Catholic education in how to deal with people of different viewpoints and like lifestyles and even theologies, like how do you try to see, like how do you
what's the optimal balance?
Yeah, the balance of appreciating the humanity in them but also trying to steer them towards God, and that's not well educated.
I know because I know a lot of Catholics who will say like boldly proclaim the truth. Like I know people who are kind of that mentality, and then
Jesus tells you don't pray in the town square trying to show everyone how good you are. Go hide in your closet and make sure nobody knows you're praying. Like,
right?
I know that's meant to be more about hypocrisy, but still, like you get the idea.
You could also find passages where you go proclaim the word in the streets, and then if people
don't hide the lantern under a basket is one of the
don't hide
parables.
the lantern under a basket, and then if people ignore you, you shake the dust off your sandals and go to the next house.
Yeah.
All right. So it's like you could find passages to back it up both ways, and I have examples of actual people in my head who have misapplied these rules. Where I know a guy. I know a guy who again, this guy was not socially calibrated. I don't want to bash this guy, but there was it was at a Catholic meeting, and it was a bunch of young adults, and not everyone there was Catholic. One of the people was Protestant, and she kind of made that known by like, oh, as a Protestant, I believe this. And one of the this one guy who just, I don't know what was going through his head, but like he said, oh, there's a special place in hell for people like you. And,
why would you say that?
Well, yeah, all right. So everyone else in the room just recoiled. And one of the guys who was kind of like leading the conversation, he's like, yeah, we don't say that here. Which, and the person who, the Protestant was fine. She was very mature about it. She understood the situation. But it's like, hold on, what went wrong there? Like, that guy who said that, he was doing his version of boldly proclaim the truth.
Yeah.
What that translated into was boldly proclaim the truth as I see the truth. Like, this is my idea of the truth, and I'm going to boldly proclaim it. Whether it may or may not be true, but I'm going to boldly proclaim it because I think it's true. So when I hear boldly proclaim the truth, that's what I'm going to do. And it's like, maybe
for these people to basically be told that they are the bad one.
Yeah, but it wasn't the church hierarchy or the church teachings that stepped in. It was the common sense of the guy who happened to be leading the conversation.
Well, yeah, of course.
And even then, like, this guy who said that, he was very up to snuff on his holy days, and he knew all the rules. Like, he just wasn't calibrated. Like, he just thought that was just the thing he could say. He just didn't know. And that's what I'm getting at, was like, how much of the church is like that in ways that we don't even know. So like, that was just due to social miscalibration. But like, what if there's other cases that aren't so obviously social miscalibration? Like again, like how do you deal with, as a Catholic, how do you deal with people? Yeah.
So I think the church needs to have a more consistent presence in our practical lives. So the idea is, like, if this happens, like, yes, in the very here and now, this guy, like, you have to have just a bystander step in. But then afterwards, like right after the thing, you could say, hey, I want you to, was a kind of a big deal, and I think you really messed up. Can we go to what's it called? Can we go to
Chivalry
the priest?
I was talking about before.
Yeah, can we go to the priest and like have the priest like explain this to you and litigate for us, so that way you don't think that I'm misinterpreting something, and I don't think you're misinterpreting something. We have the actual facts and like an authority here. And the idea is, like, if he says no, then he says, well, I can't let you be part of this group, and I will talk to the priest and tell him about you, and that you refuse to talk with him about this, like, and that's the point. Is like, if you have a bad egg who's completely resistant to being a bad egg, or like some sort of phenomenon that's a bad phenomenon that's completely resistant, you need an authority, preferably made up of as many people as possible. Unfortunately, the church's resources are spread thin. So you might have one priest, and guess what? Not all priests are good people. A lot of them are also bad people.
Well, this is what I was saying with Chivalry.
So they could say, like, oh, hey, I totally am fine with that. Like, say it loud and proud, fuck Protestants, And then you're like, I don't think that's right, but you're the priest, so I have to believe you. And then, of course, you go after all of history. All of history has shown examples of priests being bad, examples of the church being bad. Freaking indulgences and everything. I would normally say the Crusades, but the Crusades had their own. That's a whole other discussion. But regardless, the Inquisition itself was also not bad. But then you have the Spanish Inquisition, which was bad, and you've got like all sorts of examples of abuse in the church. And I'm not talking just sexual abuse. I'm talking about like just in general abuse,
whatever.
Like extortion and everything, corruption, and like the idea is like inevitably we're humans. We're inevitably human, and the idea is you if you think that you can have the entirety of theology in your mind completely 100% correct and everyone else around you is wrong, there is just objectively, there is a strong chance that you are the wrong one. And the idea is and yes, I do get the idea that just because the majority believes something is the case doesn't make it true. The idea is you need forms of litigation and control. You need knowledge to be free and available. You need as much knowledge as possible. You need authorities who can dictate and understand the knowledge, and you need jurors who can basically say things, who can basically make decisions based on the knowledge that has been given. So, for example, imagine if you had a religious court. And it's funny because literally from the beginning of this conversation, I'm like, I like courts. Courts are good. Courts are how you get justice. And now I'm talking about having a religious court.
Yeah.
You can have a religious court where basically someone says, I think this is a sin or I think this is not a sin. And then your religious lawyers come out with their religious texts saying, this is a text that is part of the Gospels or the New Testament. And in this line, it says this. And I have this, and then I have this line in this book and this line in that book, all that support my opinion that X is a sin or X is not a sin. And then the other guy gives his thing, and that's how theoretically it should go with religion and theology, and that's actually how it has gone. That's what all the books are. That's what Thomas Aquinas is. That's what freaking the debates were. Actually, one of the things that people don't know about during the initial Protestant Revolution was there was debates. They had public debates of Protestant scholars duking it out in the public with Catholics that were formally organized, literally like we do with our politicians now, where the Protestants were saying, I think this, and this, and the Catholics were coming and saying, no, it should be this, and this. And that's how a rational society should handle religion.
Yeah, it's so complicated because it's not just a problem of humans being human. It's the meta human problem of humans being human about humans being human. I was reading a book about it's a book called Bearing False Witness, and it's by a Catholic it's by a Protestant historian who's defending the Catholic Church just for the sake of history, because he says, as a historian, the Catholic Church gets so bashed to the point where just people believe these inaccuracies. And just as a historian, I'm just gonna I don't have any particular love for the Catholic Church. I don't think the church handled its abuse scandals in a very good way. But just for the sake of my profession, I'm gonna come out and say, look, the Dark Ages weren't so dark in as many ways as you think. And it's, and people say the Dark Ages that's the age when the church controlled the culture. And it's all right, we had the plague and that sucked. But aside from that, there was a lot of, it was just decentralized and people.
Actually, you took the words out of my mouth. So one thing that people are saying, the Dark Ages were so bad because everyone was poor and couldn't feed themselves and everything was bad. All the technology is bad. But here's the thing. Yes, the technology was low, and we lost a lot of knowledge. Especially one of the greatest sins of mankind ever was burning the Library of Alexandria. And as a Christian, I will own up that it was the Christians who did that, and fuck those people who did that. They are not true.
No true Scotsmen.
Yeah. So, but sorry, the point I was trying to.
That was a buzzword. You didn't deserve that.
Yeah, but what I want to say is okay. So in that time period, things were incredibly decentralized, and the law had effectively very little. So think about it this way: if I want to go and do basic commerce with other human beings. So the law is in there, the government is in there in so many ways. And I don't want to bring this into a libertarian front, but the government has its fingers in every aspect of your society. You're taxed on every single thing, monetary transaction you pretty much make is taxed. Your car is regulated. when you're driving, you have to drive in a very specific way to avoid for safety reasons. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying that the government had as a hand there that you can go to prison because of the way you drive, and the list goes on. Like I can't I can't smoke weed in most states because it is illegal. I'm not necessarily saying that weed's good. I'm just saying that the government will stop me if they know I'm doing it. And the point is in the Dark Ages, apart from like the small amount of money that your lord and the church would levy from you, you basically had like effectively no laws. Everything was done via like effectively courts of a public opinion. So if someone murdered your like brother or something like that, you literally had to go to the town and be like, this guy killed my brother, and like, can we like get him over here and deal with him? There was not really a police. There was just the town guard who was there to make sure that there's no like actual like anarchy going on, you know? Like, and that's kind of the point, is like there are certain plus sides to the Dark Ages. It like, look up anarcho-primitivism if you want to kind of understand the ethos of what I'm talking about. It's the idea is that,
to rattle this off the top of my head, but I think the Dark Ages saw the beginnings of Gothic architecture and polyphony, so harmony in music. Like the Dark Ages saw a lot of the Dark Ages actually saw a lot of technological innovation.
I don't know if this is going to become a podcast or not, but anyone who ever hears me needs to know about the beauty of Ludus Danielis. Ludus Danielis was made in the 12th century, I believe. I think it was like the late 12th century, and it was made in France, and it is a play, like a choral play of the Book of Daniel in the Bible, or at least most of it, and of the parts of Belshazzar.
I think this is turning into a good podcast. Yeah,
Darius.
But I'll look this up after I re-listen to this.
Yeah, but the idea is that it's one of the most beautiful works of music ever made. And it's been so many different orchestras have put their own twists on it. My personal favorite one is actually a progressive metal version of it with a whole play done. It's all in Latin, and it's just the best thing ever. I think in Crossroads once I even played a clip of the prayer of Daniel in the Lion's Den, which is a eleison. Yeah. Yeah, and it's so amazing, and it's like the Dark Ages were not all that dark. Like, you also have to keep in mind that apart from Italy, a lot of Europe was pretty backwater. Like, all of Germany was a backwater. Poland was a backwater. Like, France was slightly better than a backwater. England was a backwater. You know, like all of the prosperity was focused strictly in Italy and like Egypt and the Middle East. And guess what? Those places weren't all that dark. Those places still had plenty of learning and science and everything. People just call it the Dark Ages because Western Europe was dark. And they're like, and it's like, oh, how Eurocentric of you to think that because France had poor people and didn't have technology means the entire world is going through a dark age. Meanwhile, in like Damascus, all tons of science and medicine are being developed. You know, the greatest, it was Ibn Sina, or was, I don't remember the guy's name, but like the first real surgeon developed some of the earliest surgery and medical techniques known to humanity in Damascus.
There was a lot of practical innovation during that time. Like, just practically, it wasn't like at the level of theory and science, but it was at the level of practical, like, let's invent. It wasn't aqueducts, but there was like some kind of, I forget the detail.
I would say
architectural innovation.
I would say it had a lot more to do with like logistics. So the idea is like we created more advanced forms of decentralized control and organization. So what that means is like, okay, before you basically had a dictator do everything. You know, like you had an over-centralized system where basically you just had a governor and he kind of just told everyone what to do. And then suddenly, over time, we developed like, okay, we can have a guy in charge of this who's also telling you to do this, and then there's this regulation and that, and also like we can write this all down in books, like we can have courts and stuff like that. Roman Empire, I don't think had much in the way of a legal system. It probably had some, but nothing that fancy. A lot of the more advanced legal stuff, you know where it came from? Friggin' Scandinavia. Scandinavia was the first place where like women could sue their husbands for like domestic violence. You know, like
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like if you killed someone, the courts would intervene in Scandinavia, and you would pay money. Like they called it weregild, like blood money. And the idea was like you could go to the courts and seek redress. Like this is an important advancement during the Dark Ages that people just forget about. And like
well, Encyclopedia Britannica has actually, if you Google the Dark Ages Britannica, if you Google that, it'll direct you to the Encyclopedia Britannica page to the pre-Middle Ages, and they're not calling it the Dark Ages anymore because they don't like the negative connotation. This is Encyclopedia Britannica. This isn't like CatholicAnswers.com. This is like, you know. But I get, I think originally what I was driving at was like, it's humans being humans about humans being humans, you know, and it's like, I don't know what to believe anymore about Christopher Columbus. Like, there was a Christopher Columbus statue in the town next to me just this past week or two that got spray painted all red, and they took it down, and I guess the city council just voted to like have it's gone. Like, the Columbus statue's not coming back. And it's like, I don't know what to believe about Christopher Columbus because, like, you know, everyone's saying, oh, he's this guy who did a whole bunch of bad things, and it's like, is that just the Dark Ages? Like, is this just a hangover of anti-Christian sentiments? Like, I don't know what to believe about this stuff. Like, because not only is bad people a thing, but it's just over demonization is also a thing, and that's what I mean by the meta human problem. It's the humans being humans about other humans. You know, it's like, are they just demonizing people because they want to find injustice? Like, that's a thing, you know. And I don't know what to believe.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So anyway. I will say that unless this is propaganda that was told to me, because it's always possible that a lot of my judgments and like knowledge about history is propaganda. Because you also have to keep in mind, a lot of governments and a lot of people are rewriting history books. You got to be careful about that, especially with things that the more modern you go, usually the more common it is. So, like, for example, anything but Japan and Korea and their interactions, guess what? There's no consensus, because the Koreans will say one thing and the Japanese will say another.
Yeah.
And this goes for all over the world. So, anyway, what I've heard is that Christopher Columbus was actually a really vile person. Like, he went over there, but he basically also conquered the natives. He did, rather than accepting them as a sort of society that lived there, he effectively saw them as a stateless rabble and imposed his state, the crown of Spain, upon them. It's funny, he was Italian. And then furthermore, he enslaved a lot of these people. Well, I know for sure he got, and this may be propaganda, but didn't he get dragged in chains by his own people to the king and queen of Spain because he was going too crazy, enslaving the natives?
I don't know, but again, this is where it's like, I don't know who to believe, because I don't know who to believe. Like, what's the evidence? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Well, the idea is, effectively, to some extent, you have to ask yourself, am I willing to look over first, like, the source documents? So are you going to read the actual letters of correspondence that Christopher Columbus and his soldiers were sending to Spain? Probably not.
But I don't think... Not you, but I don't think you are either.
Like,
I don't mean you, but I mean like...
Yeah.
If someone comes out with a strong opinion against Columbus, I don't think they've actually read the source documents for the evidence of what the actions and deeds actually were. I don't think they have. And it's like, that's what I mean with, all right, so now we're at a place where no one's read the source documents, so who do I believe? Like, what do I believe? What do I think about this? like we can't do collective sense making because it's just humans being humans, and it's
Well, fundamentally, you have to, at some point, you can accept the ruling of you basically have to make a decision. Do I accept what the experts say, the people who have looked at the source documents? And I acknowledge that you're granting them a lot of power over your opinion. You're basically saying, you looked at documents, so I believe what you say. So they can say whatever the fuck they want. And
I would tend to trust historians on this. Yeah. So are you reading historians when you are forming your opinion about this?
Yes. See, that's the thing is like I'll generally look at. I won't just listen to what someone said on TV. I'll generally look at okay, what did what are some sources that are being pointed to? Like for example, when I look at a Wikipedia article, I'll actually always look at okay, is the statement being made here actually being cited? And if so, and if it's particularly interesting, I'll actually look at who said it. What is the citation in itself?
This is tangentially related, but I actually have a little mini database on my phone, and I want to do a little time capsule about what is it like to experience the news in 2020. So anytime I see some kind of any statement that I think is stereotypical of the left or the right, I'm just screenshotting it and I'm saving it, and I think I want to put a video together of a time capsule of what is it like to experience online news in 2020. And it's so the stereotypes are just in your face. It's so so I got a clip from Fox News where it's what are the goals of this left-leaning organization? It's destroy capitalism, some other thing, and it's and then the last bullet was attack and dethrone God. And that was on Fox News. Then I could find stuff on the left. And I could find stuff on the left where it's oh my God, it was the diversity of thought is just a euphemism for white supremacy. That's on a popular magazine. That was a headline on it was oh my God. So I'm just saving all this shit, and I'm gonna put a couple videos together. I think just making fun of it.
Yeah.
Unrelated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but yeah. So you can do your own research. Apparently, Christopher Columbus was removed from his office as governor of the West Indies, and furthermore, he was accused of tyranny during his own time. Supposedly, he was dismembering people, but at the same time, all these reports are in documents written by people who had reason to not like Christopher Columbus. So we're effectively reading the documents written by people who are not Christopher Columbus that are explaining how he ruled. And these are people who stood to gain by defaming Christopher Columbus. So you basically have to make your own opinion. You have to say, okay, is this person actually going to gain? Is this guy not? You would have to make your own analysis. But anyway, back to what you were saying before about the news. For example, the thing that I particularly in the more modern time have been interested in is the way that the right will try to the right and left will try to demonize each other's ideas without even granting the simplest acknowledgements of humanity to the other side. So, for example,
is that called
Trump
gaslighting?
Gaslighting is when you try to convince someone that something happened in the past that didn't actually happen. Or convince someone that usually it's the idea is trying to convince someone that something was their fault when it actually wasn't. So
I know there's
gaslighting.
I know gaslighting happens politically because you hear contradictory stories about the past. So I know that happens, but
yeah. So gaslighting would be if I said if we got into a car if I was driving, let's say we were both drunk and we were driving and we got into an accident. Then a year later, I say you were driving that car. It's your fault. That kind of thing. I place the blame on you about some sort of dubious thing without necessarily proof. But anyway, what I want to say is for example, Trump and his administration with the Republicans, they've done a lot of criminal justice reform, and they just did an executive order on police reform. And the idea is like, yeah, you could argue that it's not enough, but hey, it's something. Like, we got something out of the government to help in these things that people are literally protesting about right now. Like, and rather than trying to acknowledge, like, hey, we got something. This isn't completely a waste. Everyone basically immediately says, there's still Satan and Hitler, and we need a hell of a lot more. And also, that thing they did is also bad, because here's how. It would have been better if they didn't even do that. Like, and that's the thing. I'm like,
no arguments
like, you didn't even acknowledge the possible gain you got out of a potentially good act that your opposition has made, you know? And like, and then the same thing goes with the right on the left. Like for example, I'm like, I think minimum wages should be higher. And like, you like wage stagnation is a real thing, and people are getting really screwed by this. But then every time anyone brings up anything about wages, the entire right goes, oh, well, then you're messing with the free market, and then like the cost of goods will be passed on and everything. And then like everyone goes in this whole tangent, and like they claim that it's the most evil thing. And I'm like, I'm not even telling you how to solve it. I'm saying that this is a problem, that wages are low.
No, I think we're on the same page that our legacy media is obsolete.
Yes, and I think luckily, I think that
the incentives are fucked. I think we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, and I think people are waking up to this too, that the media is fucked.
Oh yeah, no, I think, I have a hard time convincing people of this, but I think society is just a bunch of negative feedback loops where if we stray too far in one direction, it's going to self-correct. And I think media is doing that, where people are so thirsty for genuine conversations that podcasts are just taking over right now.
Oh yeah, for
like
sure.
Joe Rogan is just as popular as NBC.
Yeah,
like he is, and he'll just sit down with someone for 3 hours. So I think we're on the same page there. Actually, I think what I'm more interested in is how do us as the users, how do we communicate with other users of the media? You know what I mean? Like, we all agree. I think the media is bullshit, and people get really wound up in polarizing narratives. I think. My concern is how do we deal with people who are just drinking the Kool-Aid? And I have examples in my head. So actually, the last podcast I did was with a cousin of mine who's kind of woke, and I'm just not. Like, I don't see the world in terms of structural oppression, and I'll acknowledge structural problems, and I'll acknowledge, and I've been on the receiving end of let's say structural biases. Like, I've been on the receiving end of this stuff. Like, I know it's no joke. I know what it feels like to be salty about these things. But I still don't see the world in those terms. And I got into it was a good conversation with her, and that's why I put it up as a podcast. But I think people are kind of incapable of the Andrew Yang mantra, which was it's not left or right but forward. I actually really struggle with that. So the conversation I had was the conversation I had in my last podcast was about the George Floyd phenomenon and how the world blew up, and the whole conversation about race in America. And
that's kind of become a meme now. Do you want to have an honest conversation about race?
well, I think we did, but we just have, like, it's just people with totally different perspectives on this thing. And I think we had a good conversation, which I think highlighted how honest people can struggle with this. Because again, so the person, when I had the conversation, like, this person, my cousin who I was talking to, she had been in abusive relationships, and she knows what it means for toxic behaviors to get reinforced, and she understands how that can happen from a first-hand experience and from also working from abuse victims, she just has a very intuitive understanding of that. And all those concepts she has in her head, she applies to the race thing. And so for her, it's just these toxic behaviors that are reinforced over the years. And that's how she sees the whole thing. And as a result, she's a lot more woke on that end of the spectrum. And that's just her perspective on things getting brought to bear in the current situation. And I understood that, but I had a really hard time explaining to her what my side was. And my side is complicated, but I don't know if you want to interject. Go for it if you want to.
I just have one thing is like I can see that, but my issue is I don't know if it's accurate to ascribe human psychology to the institutions of the government.
No, all right, perfect that you brought that up, because when you're having conversations about really emotional topics, you can go in there's two directions that you can go in, and I'm actually not sure how to I have my own theories about this, but how do we resolve it? Which is, one, let's say you're talking about racism, or let's say you're talking about sexual harassment, or let's say you're talking about religion, right? If you're having a conversation about someone and you're both really into it, and let's say you're both genuine about it, right? Let's say you're both trying to have a good conversation and trying to understand each other. The conversation, in my experience, goes one of two ways. Here's the first way, is we intellectualize the issue, and we talk about statistics, and we philosophize about it, and we get really, really intellectual. Right? So let's talk about, just as an example, let's talk about, I don't know, the existence of God. I can recite arguments for why God might exist from a first cause. Maybe I present your nice forms argument, right? I don't know. But let's say I present these arguments, right? And at the end of that conversation where we go back and forth about arguments, maybe he buys it, maybe he doesn't. It's kind of dependent on how well I articulated myself in that conversation. And he's probably going to go back and Google a bunch of things, maybe. I don't know. At the end of the day, though, at the end of that conversation, he has no idea why I'm actually religious. So he's missing half the coin. On the other, right? So there's the pros and cons. The pros is we can talk in objective ways about issues, and there's I don't want to diminish that.
There's also the consequences of the belief of those. The
consequences, I don't know any Catholics who are actually Catholic because they meditated on the finitude of the universe.
Exactly.
All right? And so I don't know any, and the thing is, I don't know any, I don't know any black people who are afraid of the cops because they looked at statistics. Yeah. You know what I mean? This doesn't exist. And so why...
Can I interject one moment?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say, with the Catholics thing, it's usually a Catholic might be okay, I'm a Catholic because I know it makes me a better person, and what does it mean by being a better person? Okay, well, going to things okay, I know generally it means I'm going to live my life in a more fulfilling way, and I'm more likely to be happy, and that you have some sort of anecdotal evidence to support that, or if you're a very logical person, you might have objective evidence to believe that. And that just matters based on the person. And then the same thing goes for everything in life. It's usually you look more so at the consequences of what. So basically, rather than looking at the logic of the belief, you look at the consequences that happen of you having that belief in a more game theoretic way. So, do I believe that? For example, you could say, okay, there is a merchant trying to sell me something.
That's kind of too logical for me.
Do I believe they're? Yeah, it's do I believe? Do I go through his entire life story to believe why he would try to cheat me or not, or to figure out if he's going to cheat me or not, or do I say, okay, is my ability to gain generally better than the chances that I generally perceive of him cheating me based on my anecdote? My anecdotal evidence.
Even that's a little too logical for me personally. So for me personally, if I had to answer, why am I religious, or why am I Catholic? If I had to give an honest answer to that, it's because I had religious experiences, and the Catholic Church provided the vocabulary and the community and the rituals which made sense of those experiences. That's it. There's no game theory. There's no philosophy. That's it. That's why I'm Catholic, and that's why That's and if I drifted and if I'm coming back, that's why I'm going to come back.
Yeah, I'm a bit
that's
more.
my story.
Yeah, I'm a bit more logical, I would say, because what happened was I was in your boat, and then I drifted away from the Catholic Church for the same reasons why you drifted towards it. Was I felt that the Catholic Church was restricting my vocabulary, and I needed to do more research about theology and philosophy to figure things out. What I needed actually more logical understanding of everything and trying to look at things as a whole, and basically to return to the Catholic Church. I actually had to do more logicking, more processing of everything for me to be like, oh, this actually makes sense.
Yeah, but that's your story.
And I do realize I'm different from most people. So
yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. Is what do most people do? And I think politics is falling into the same trap of we intellectualize issues which most people, like when most people pick their side of the coin, whether it's left or right, when you pick your side of the coin, it's not for intellectual reasons most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think.
I think it's usually more so for practical reasons.
I think it's the top. Who do you surround yourself with?
That's actually the most, because the public opinion, the quote unquote public opinion about you, the opinion of the people around you of you, is generally the most valuable thing that you'll get by doing anything in politics.
Yeah.
Because the idea is, if everyone's like, yeah, I love Steven because he's such an activist, he really believes in the cause, he's such a hero, you're gonna like that.
That's gonna make Christopher Columbus statue red.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, you could look like a hero for supporting the political cause that everyone around you supports.
Yeah.
And the idea is, like, the actual political gain you get is minor compared to the actual social gain you get. So, like, let's say you wanted to preach about, like, I don't know, let's say lowering taxes or whatever. The amount of tax money you get back is going to be relatively small in value compared to, in terms of your contribution as a person to how much the government has given you back, is going to be minor relative to the amount of social gain you get as a result of your contribution.
Yeah.
So I definitely wholeheartedly agree with you there that your social pressure is the 100% the most convincing reason as to your political ideology.
Yeah. So here's so my concern that's been on my mind right now is, how do we actually make sense of the world around us, and how do we make sense of the political situation around us in 2020? Because I don't know, and I've had conversations about the race issue in America. I had a couple of those, and I put one of them on the podcast, and I had another one offline with someone else who's also pretty woke, and it's funny because at the end of the day, if we're just, maybe I'll use this example to pull the string, but if I'm just zooming in on police, are the police racist, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you pose the question. There's two ways you can answer this, or there's two ways you could frame the question. One is,
to be honest, I think there's a lot more than that, but continue.
Yeah, well, I guess the way I approach it, and it's not necessarily been successful because I don't know what to make of it, but it's, on the one hand, is there a tension between police and the black community? I'd have to ask people about their lived experiences on that one. Like, there's no other way I can investigate that. I just have to ask a bunch of people about their opinions. Another way is, let's look at statistics and try and answer objectively and philosophically. And I can go both ways on this. Like, I can look at a stat which says, black people are, disproportionately likely to get shot. And that's one way of doing statistics. Another way of doing statistics is, if I put a GoPro on every cop, I would actually see more white people get shot. So if I'm a cop, I'm shooting more white people than black people. How can that be racist? So I can argue both ways just on stats alone, and it's an interesting philosophical question. that we can dig into stats, and it would be a good, there's some good lessons learned about how to do stats properly, and I could make it a teaching moment, and all this nice intellectual philosophical stuff. And at the end of the day, if people are just hurt by what's going on, it's like that can come off as really callous. And I'm not quite sure how to navigate these conversations yet.
So the first thing I want to say is a huge issue of any sort of debate is psychology. And here's why. If I perceive myself to be a victim, there's no form of logical argument you could give me that makes me change my opinion. That's the problem and I think that's one of the biggest psychological problems of victim culture.
But I think the second problem is if you think you're a victim, then maybe you are in a sense that. Yeah.
That's the problem is the just because you if you feel you're a victim, if you feel you are a victim, it may be because you are a victim, or maybe just because propaganda has made you believe you are a victim.
I think the sharp example of this is people waving a Confederate flag and then people getting offended at that.
Yeah,
because all you're doing is you're waving a piece of cloth in the air. You're not hurting physically. You're not hurting. It's literally the people's headspace around this piece of cloth. And
actually, let's be even a little more generous, because you could say, oh, those people are maliciously flying that flag to inspire memories of our enslavement, which are traumatic to us. So that's really bad, and you're effective. It's the same thing as yelling the N-word at us or something like that. But let's say take something else for example. Let's say Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind is actually an anti-South movie. It's meant to show how the nature of the what's called the South resulted in its downfall and a lot of the problems associated with it. But because it's considered problem, and it's also it generally acknowledged to be a beautiful movie. One of the first black women, if not the first black woman, to receive an Oscar was from that film. And the idea is,
it's like Mark Twain.
That got,
Mark Twain uses the N-word, so he's racist.
In Huck Finn, yeah. So the idea is, you have these works of fiction that are objectively considered to be acknowledged great works of art that are not,
which accurately represent the reality of the time.
Yes, but are not intended to be inflammatory to the people of one minority type. And the idea is, just because they reference the previous oppression, they are being silenced. They're being removed.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that is even more so than a Confederate flag. That's what makes me more mad. The idea that things that are vaguely related to any form of oppression are being silenced and removed. And the worst part is that I think that actually worsens the message of these people, because I don't want to go out here and start the whole political discussion, but we're already kind of in it. But the idea is
I don't know, the political discussion has to happen. At some point, I feel like I have to sit down with someone who can't even call Trump president. I feel like an obligation to sit down with someone like that and try to sort something out.
But the idea is I think that in pretty much the majority of the population of this country could agree that the police are not perfect in their current state and they need some sort of reform.
And most of those people aren't police.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the idea is okay, so we generally acknowledge there's a problem. It's just a matter of everyone disagrees on how to solve the problem. For example, I generally say we need to actually give police more training and better equipment, because personally, I'm hey, all these people are are effectively they're freaking out. They're under severe stress. They're working crazy hours, and they're more likely to make mistakes as a result of that. If you're able to, and furthermore, there's a lack of personnel. The same cop is meant to deal with every single possible scenario. And actually, part of the executive order that just got signed is if they're dealing with someone who is known to have drugs, they will bring a psychologist over or some sort of trained professional, whatever that's going to mean, to help de-escalate the situation because they understand the situation that person's in related to drugs. Cops aren't psychologists, but psychologists may be what's needed to help de-escalate these scenarios and prevent people from running away and trying to go nuts and attack the cops or whatever and end up getting shot, or in general, you need more people there.
They can help find the de-escalation solution.
Yes, and furthermore, I would and see, this is actually something I don't think was related to the executive order that I think should happen. Cops should be more encouraged to intervene if they see improper training or improper techniques being used. So, for example, with George Floyd, the whole knee on the neck thing, that's not how you're supposed to restrain someone. But he did it anyway, and no one stopped him.
He was already restrained, yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where it's if so one of those cops should be like, is that how you're supposed to do it? I think you probably should stop. He's pretty good. Someone should be able to do that. And not feel any sense of fear in doing so.
Yeah, I think the tricky part of this conversation is you can come up with a totally sensible explanation of why would they not do anything in that situation. I can come up with an explanation where maybe that guy who was on the neck was the most senior person there. I don't know, and maybe they trusted him that he was doing the right thing, and maybe there was an element of cowardice where they saw what was happening, and maybe they didn't have the balls to act on it. All of these things are in line with human nature, as far as I'm aware, my conception of human nature. And if you're going to say it's racist structural oppression, it's that doesn't map onto human nature as I understand it. Sorry.
Yeah, so first thing is, from what I've heard, actually at least two of those cops that were there were being trained by Derek Chauvin. So
okay.
they were less experienced, and they generally deferred to him as a senior officer. So that's one thing that was bad. But two, the other thing is the whole systemic structural thing. I actually kind of get that too. So the idea is this: you have to think about it. Although this is more so of a perspective of
I actually don't understand what that means.
So the idea is it's more so based on what is considered illegal and requiring police intervention than what is not. So think about it this way. The police is effectively the hammer of the state. Mm-hmm. The police is there to enforce with guns the state's laws.
Yep.
And the idea is most people could argue that there are certain laws in the books that probably don't need the police to enforce them, but they are. So, for example, this is actually something that's been happening a lot. There's been a lot of good happening, but for example, drugs. If someone is on drugs, that doesn't necessarily mean the police have to come in and beat them to the ground and arrest them and drag them to a police station. What probably could happen is you could probably find solutions to this problem that can involve much less violent, forceful intervention. You could probably identify them and send them a freaking ticket in the mail. You might not have to even arrest them.
But that's not the police's job. Is that what you're getting at?
My point is certain aspects of the law are being enforced with effectively violent force that don't need to be enforced with violent force. For example, with this with George Floyd, he was there to he had a counterfeit $20 bill. To be fair, he was arrested because he appeared drunken or whatever. I think he was intoxicated at the time, but I don't know that. I don't know for sure. I haven't done my due diligence in the research there. But
I think I have a pretty good sense of what actually makes this conversation tricky, because I just had a couple of these conversations where, like, that was seen as a microcosm of racism and everything that's wrong with police and black relations in the U.S. And my point is, there's no evidence for it, really, and there's evidence against it because he was an asshole to white people, and he has a record of that. And
my perspective is, like, the system is built in a way that is not cooperative with the lifestyles of people who are impoverished, and it happens to be that minorities are generally impoverished. And furthermore, the system in the USA is not very good for class mobility. And that's something that, like, I don't have the statistics on me, but that's generally a thing. Class mobility is really bad.
No, that's pretty much my perspective on it too.
Yeah,
it's
and
more
that's
of a class poverty thing.
Yeah, so the system, I would argue, is racist, because the system back in the day, through racism or like real racism, direct racism, slavery, put these people into poverty, and then created a system, and then the system was built around that unfortunately is not conducive to their mobility out of poverty. And furthermore, enforces the laws of the system with deadly force that may not need to be enforced with deadly force. So the idea is, you can't escape from poverty, and also the cops are going to kill you because of the because you're committing crimes that are likely to happen as a result of your poverty.
Yeah, so
that's kind of the system. What it means by an oppressive system.
All right, so here's where I get trapped in this conversation, because I think I'm kind of a dick about this, but I understand exactly what you're saying, and that's how I would frame the problem, and that's how I also frame the trap against me, which is, if it's a poverty thing, but let's say minorities are disproportionately poor. Okay, and let's say the disproportionately poor is due to racism in the past. On board with that. The problem is, the solution to racism is not anti-racism. It's better, it's better colorblind policies that are better enforced.
This is where I kind of bow out of the discussion, because I do not know how to fix the United States.
I know how to fix one problem at a time, though. I could fix police violence for you. Ready?
I don't know if you can. And I don't mean that I'm saying you're dumb. I'm just saying that, like, you're not a graduate of...
All right, I'm not a cop. I don't have any experience with this.
Like, you're not a cop. You're not a cop. You're not a police commissioner. You don't have a lot of experience dealing with the actual police. Even less so with the actual legal system surrounding the police. That's kind of my point, personally.
But at the same time, I could imagine
everything
a world.
I say is theoretical.
But at the same time, I can imagine a world where the policies for how to conduct an arrest are pretty explicitly laid out. That doesn't seem that's not as difficult to me as the office harassment problem. Like, the processes for conducting an arrest seem like they can be laid out a little better. Or at least...
There will always be edge cases. Like, you can improve it, but you'll never make it perfect. And then someone will eventually die, and then the same thing will happen. Like,
I don't know.
Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't improve it. Like, if we can... Every life we save is good. So, if we can do something to save it, we should.
All right,
but I'm saying that there will always... It's not a universal panacea.
All right. First of all, it's not super clear to me, because I think you can have at least a process for conducting an arrest. And I have no freaking idea if there is or not. I assume there probably is some kind of process right now. But that aside, what's the alternative? Anti-racism doesn't fix the supposed racism problem, and that's my whole conundrum, and that's probably what makes me a dick about this. But like, anti-racism doesn't seem to solve the problem from my understanding of the problem in the first place.
I think you're applying the concept of anti-racism to the wrong spot, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Like I said, I have no clue what'll solve the U.S., but
love it. No, do it.
Yeah, but the idea is, anti-racism is not being targeted towards police officers. it's being targeted towards the politicians who have the power to actually implement reforms needed to deal with police officers, and also the
Bullshit.
people who are like
All right.
there to vote and sponsor the careers of these politicians.
I gotta call bullshit.
And
on that.
the idea is like
Yeah.
you can call anti-racism to every cop in the world, and then good, nothing gets changed. You know, they'll say, "Oh, we'll do better next time." That's bullshit to think that that's going to happen. But the idea is, if you convince enough politicians that this is a problem by saying being not racist isn't enough, you need to be anti-racist. You need to just not introducing racist laws isn't enough. You need to be anti-racist and put in legislation and other laws that actually actively fix the problem for black people. You will create a better world. And
Well,
that's the problem. Is they want to.
Hold on. So how do you do that? We already have equality. I don't know. Am I a duck now? Equality. We already have equality under the law. So what's the next step to enforcing that after we have equality under the law? Because we already have that. So what's the next step after that? It's just
police reform, class mobility, programs to help the impoverished. Like, the idea is you have to look at the places where minorities are stuck in. They're stuck in poverty. So,
right, so I've actually done
a reform. Right. If a reform targets all impoverished people, guess what? That's going to target a lot more black people. You know, that's going to that is you don't yes, you can do it in a colorblind inevitably you have to do it in a colorblind way.
That's my.
If you're asking for if we should institute legislation that does things explicitly by color, I say that's wrong. Just because I'm afraid of the slippery slope fallacy, where we start saying
that's my point. That's exactly my point.
Yeah, I'm worried that if you say, we have a law that says black people all get $10,000 a year from the government because reparations. Let's say you do that. I'm sure the anti-racist crowd will be like, yeah, that's good. Then what's to say that eventually what's there to if we set that precedent that we can just straight up say people of this skin color get something better or more so than everyone else, then suddenly what's going to stop when the Nazis got to power from saying, all white people get free money or all black people don't get to go to school or something like that? You have to make everything
understand this
equal.
now. All right, I'm convinced that we're on the same page about this now. But the need to get towards a colorblind society where the color of your skin is just about as interesting as your hair color politically.
I think personally what needs to happen is we need to create a system that allows more class mobility so that people who are stuck in because the idea is there's the race spectrum, but there's also the economic spectrum. And the idea is we want the spectrum of race to be equal to their presence in the economics.
All right, so let me steel man the opposition to that.
Yeah.
All right. So the opposition to that is, let's look at the cultural end of things and the collective headspace that people are in. So we just we're the only white majority nation to have elected and re-elected a black president. All right, that's a cultural in one sense that's a cultural phenomenon, and at the same time, I could go again at the level of culture, I can go to a school and incur what's stopping me if I'm a black kid or if I'm a minority or if I'm a woman, there's nothing stopping me from going and getting a STEM degree and getting an engineering job. There's nothing stopping me.
Yes, there is, and I'll tell you.
Okay.
So it's the statistically high likelihood that you'll have a family member who is on drugs and is messing up your life. The statistically high likelihood that you don't have a father, and therefore your mother is on government assistance and can't afford to send you to a good school and spend time taking care of you, because also or your mother's working 2 or 3 jobs and can't look after you and help teach you and teach you values. So guess what? You learn your values on the street. Guess what? You want, like, your life goals to sell drugs or whatever, you know?
Hold on. I'm going to call bullshit on half of that, and I'm going to totally agree with another half of that. All right, so not I don't know. I've had enough of these where I'm using strong language, but like,
yeah.
All right, so on the hand that I disagree with, I know people who have come from really rough situations, gotten the STEM degree, and made it work.
Anecdotal.
Yeah. And I know and I understand that, like, they have to be more heroic than they should have to be in order to achieve that. And that's not fair. And I'm on board with that. And would I have the strength to do that if I were in their shoes? I don't know. But my point is if you can muster the strength to do it, you can do it. And there's nothing stopping you in that sense. And
yes.
then there's the statistical, sociological, cultural sense that you're alluding to, which I agree with, which is people aren't going to do that.
Well, by that logic, you could just say, then why isn't everyone a stock market millionaire? Why is everyone complaining about poverty in general? Why don't you just pick yourself up by the bootstraps, you know? Like, why don't you just pick yourself up and then you'll totally be fine? I don't get why people are poor, you know? Like,
poverty is not the same as millionaire.
The idea is more or less the idea that poverty, as a result of itself, introduces a lot of problems that are going to likely restrict you from moving out of it.
It's a negative feedback loop where people who are in poverty
and also poverty. Exactly. That's the problem. And the idea is, yes, there will always be anecdotal evidence of people getting out, and yes, the gateway's always there. But when you're in night school working on your homework, because guess what? You're taking you longer because you didn't have a good high school education. You're in night school, college, trying to get some sort of basic degree. Agree. Which you can barely afford. You might be going to a lot of debt doing it.
Yeah. And so I think my whole family is the perfect
example. Then suddenly your mom, and then your mom overdoses on meds, and you have to go to the hospital and take care of her basically for the rest of her life. You know,
I think and
that's the kind of shit that happens. And of course, that's like
well, my family is
like,
the perfect
I will 100% acknowledge I'm super privileged and in the meme way.
Yeah. Well, my family is the perfect example of doing the hard thing and having a happy ending. Not with the mom overdosing part, but like on my mom's side of the family, my grandparents grew up in a corner of Poland on a farm. They came here, and my grandpa worked the first shift at a factory. My grandma worked the second shift at the same factory, right? And it's just they worked their asses off, and they provided a good life for their kids, and their kids had it better than they did. And then now look at me, where it's like, you know, my mom got a degree, never used it. My parents had a big family. My dad's a fireman. Like no one in my family got a physics degree. I got a physics degree. I got an engineering job, and even if I had to pay off all the debt and all the interest on my own, I could do it. And so it's like my family is the example of immigrating to the U.S. and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and making it work over the course of 3 generations, and you're fine.
So you've pinpointed something interesting, and that is something. Well, first off, I have a very similar story. My grandparents literally lived in like basically a shithole farm. They had to literally collect bog
under the thumb
to
of the
heat their home.
Block.
Yeah, and like, but there are 2 factors that I want to talk about that really mattered. So, in my case, the communists gave my parents free education, or at least the men in my family, either through a through a technical degree or a straight up engineering degree. Both of my grandfathers were sailors, sailors. One of them was an engineer sailor, so he did more like kind of like technical, like engineering work, and the other one was just a sailor. He just did boat work. But he was a relatively skilled. He was relatively skilled. I think he underwent some training for that, which he got courtesy of the government. And so the idea is, before they were basically farm people. They had like nothing, and the government basically gave them a handout, a free education to do that. So the idea is like, and I don't know about your parents if they received anything for free from the communist government, but that's part of the reason why a lot of leftists who cry racism all the time, and I'm not necessarily saying that they're wrong in doing so, they favor socialist policies because you're effectively the government straight up saying, here's free education or free job or free like money to help improve your life.
Yeah,
free healthcare or whatever.
Education history.
Yeah. But the next thing I was going to say is, both of our families had people fly over from Poland to America, where they did their due diligence and they were able to make something of themselves. Mine were generally more educated than yours because my father actually got an engineering degree in Poland before he flew over, and then he got more education in America. My mom also technically got education in Poland, although it was kind of a bullshit degree. She got like a degree in like hotel hosting or something like that, which basically made her qualified to be like a supervisor in the hotel in the hospitality industry. But
actually, my grandpa became a machinist.
Yeah.
In the U.S. for like a NASA subcontractor.
Yeah.
So I don't think he had an engineering degree.
But the main point that I wanted to bring up with all this is there's a question of the culture of the people, and the idea is how far is someone willing to go to do something. And this is kind of a taboo subject because if I say people who grow up in impoverished in America, especially minorities, are likely not going to try to seek out hard labor to pull themselves out of poverty, compared to people in the Eastern Bloc who, were impoverished but wanted to work due to cultural factors, primarily, in my opinion, religion. And I think there's a divide between, I don't know these.
I think this is exactly.
I don't know the stats, and actually, I hesitate to even bring up religion too much because there are plenty of rednecks who live in the middle of rural areas who are highly religious, but they're poor as heck, and and a lot of them are on drugs and don't want to work and whatever. They have all the same problems that minorities do, but they're white. But anyway, and white and religious.
There's also atheist rednecks who can't stop working, and I work with one of them.
Yeah, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that you have to, when you're asking about, okay, the door is open for you to pull yourself up out of poverty. No one ever said that ladder is easy, and my point is we should make that ladder easier. But you have to have the mentality to say, this ladder is there, and I'm going to climb it because I don't want to be in poverty anymore, and I'm going to put in the work to do it. But my issue is, I can yell at that to people all day, that they need to change you need to get Jesus, and you need to learn how to, get out of poverty, and, do the hard work, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and then that doesn't solve anything. That's my issue, is, I can talk all day about building a culture of self-improvement and work to try to lift yourself up, but that doesn't solve anything.
So what's your alternative to that?
You gotta do some sort of government intervention. I'm not a pure libertarian. I generally favor having a lot of civil liberties, but sometimes you need the government to intervene to improve class mobility. And the biggest thing I'm not political enough to know all the true answers. Is free education the answer? I don't know. It worked pretty well for my parents. I literally have the highest, arguably the highest degree out of anyone in my family, and I've every generation, my family gets better, and and we would have still been in that peasant bog, harvesting mud from the swamp to burn for heat. But the communists came and said, "Free education because you're poor."
So let me give you an
And
example
someone's-
of something that I personally did, and I could, ask you how well this solution might scale. But when I was in college, one of my summer jobs was I worked with a nonprofit called CPEP. It was Connecticut Pre-Engineering Programs. What we did was we provided after-school programs for high school kids, and what we did was we taught these high school kids basically how to make a website, how to manufacture, how to use laser cutting, how to use 3D modeling. Like we taught them some basic kind of engineering, manufacturing skills, and we paid them. It was a paid internship for them to learn these skills and make these things. And one of my roles was helping the nonprofit operate and also being like kind of a teacher for these kids. And so what we did, part of our MO was we targeted kids specifically who were underprivileged, who were coming from poor homes, from single parent homes. And a lot of the kids that we attracted were minority groups, were women and minority groups who usually
Yo, sorry about that.
Yo, that's actually on my end. My internet just randomly died.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to
I think it's
put this on
good. It's
pause?
good time for Stogie.
All right. Fair enough. Might be time for a leak on my end. I don't know.
Yeah, go take it now then, because I need to go. Stogie time.
All right. It's a nice looking sky you got there.
Yo. Oh yeah, you can see the chemtrails spraying me with estrogen to keep me docile and turn the frogs gay.
That's one way to put it. Biology is a wonderful thing. What do you got there?
I have a Drew Estate Muwat. I don't know if you can read the label there.
I cannot. That's all right.
Yeah,
I trust you. I'm taking
It's
your
a
word.
darker. It's a medium body cigar, a little on the darker side. And
Are you at your place? That's a dumb
this is my-
question. You were just at your computer, weren't you?
Yeah, I was at my computer.
That was the dumbest
my
question I've asked in 2020. We captured it. We're still recording. This is coming up on a. We're at 2 hours and 41 minutes, by the way, for the recording. Just the recording part.
I'm sure it'll get cut down a significant bit.
Nah, we're going full Joe Rogan. I'll cut out the bathroom bits. No, this is good. I'm liking this.
All right, do you normally do you have the option of showing the video? Because that'd be hilarious just to see me smoking.
Oh yeah. No, so the way I edit the videos, I can do the video, or I can cut out the audio specifically and just do the audio.
Yeah. Actually, I've been doing some video editing myself. I played so many video games after I got my PhD and I had a few days off that I got to the point where I'm like, I'm tired of video games. So I started a little project for myself where I'm making some kind of like cutesy YouTube videos. Like basically I'm doing effectively. Have you ever seen Internet Historian?
Yeah.
He basically will cut out stock images of people, and he'll just use them kind of like South Park style, where he'll like just move them around and stuff. I'm doing something
what's
like
your
that.
channel name?
I haven't up. Yeah, I'm still in the process of making videos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to just like start with one. You know, I want to have I want to have something good up when I start the channel and start advertising it. But
oh no,
I want to do something like that.
I literally started off. I made my first shit sandwich, and I just put that up on YouTube. That was my first video.
Yeah. Well, my goal is to make Internet Historian style videos where I cut out characters from paintings and I act out famous stories from the past. So, like, I showed you that book, Corpus Hermetica. My first work is I'm taking the first story from that, which is a dialogue, and I'm animating that with cutouts of characters from paintings.
Okay.
It's going to be really scuffed because it's like my first project, but I'm like, I don't expect to make any money off of it. I'm just doing it for fun.
Yeah.
So what do I care?
That's how you got to start off, for sure. I mean, no, that's what I like about these little podcasts that I'm recording, where it's like I'm getting something out of this regardless, so I don't really care what the views are. But
exactly,
yeah,
because so many people get stuck in the weeds of like, oh, geez, this cost me money. I want to do this full time. If YouTube screws me, then my whole life is over. And I'm not saying that I don't feel for them. YouTube shouldn't screw them. But it's one of those things where it's a luxury to not have to worry about that.
Sure. I don't know. I didn't really think too far about full timing this thing. I think what my goal is, I'm trying to put together the podcast I wish I had in when I was in college, because I think a lot of the Catholic world, our podcasts have kind of either softball questions or we get down philosophical tangents that just aren't relevant. And I'd rather be doing the Sam Harris kind of thing where it's philosophical tangents that are really relevant.
Yeah.
You know,
My issue with most of the Catholic world is they tend to strawman too much the other side.
oh, totally, yeah. No, I see that with.
Like,
I don't want to name names, but yeah, I see that.
yeah, where like they'll be like, oh, these people don't believe in God. Well, they say like, well, have they heard of the first mover argument? Oh, we're totally right, and they haven't even thought of that. Like,
Yeah, another example I heard of
there
was
are atheist like interpretations of the creation of the universe that don't require a god that you are purposefully ignoring because they're hard to deal with.
yeah, no, even more sophisticated religious YouTubers like I heard one where it's like, these atheists they believe in they believe too much in human rationality. And it's like, you ever listen to the new atheists? They are really skeptical about human reason. They're skeptical about humans and our ability to reason. So like, you just haven't listened to them enough. Like, I don't know. Whatever. Point being,
Yeah, I think it helps when you have people on the podcast like us who really like playing devil's advocate because, like, I have this thing in my head where whenever I play devil's advocate, I want to be right, because I consider it like my like a dick measuring contest of how well can I argue a point. So I'm always like,
yeah,
I got it. Okay, if I could like play devil's advocate and like totally be right, then suddenly I feel good because I'm a good debater.
yeah. I think for me, it's just more of like, you can get so deep in a philosophical conversation that you're no longer talking about relevant things.
Yeah, that's the ivory tower problem.
Yeah, and I see a lot of the ivory tower. I think I see the ivory tower. I'm not afraid to share this, but like with William Lane Craig, I see the ivory tower on full display where for some reason he frames his arguments for the existence of God in terms of scientific claims of the age of the universe. And so that puts him in this weird position where he's in public debates where he's debating atheist scientists like Lawrence Krauss about the age of the universe. And it's just this weird thing where it turned like every debate ends the same way, where William Lane Craig is going to say, well, at the end of the day, they didn't really understand the philosophical points I was making. And what the atheist scientist always ends up saying at the end of the day is like, he doesn't realize, like, William Lane Craig doesn't realize that, the science isn't actually settled and the science is always open-minded about alternate possibilities. He's just taking one side of a complicated debate that he doesn't know that much about. And it's like, fair enough. So where does that leave us? I don't know. We're back at ground zero. Like, it's just, can we talk about real things? That's what I'm driving at.
Yeah, like we can sit here and argue all day about how many angels fit on the tip of a needle.
Yeah, and
but
I think
that's meaningless in the grand scheme of things. That's why, like, generally, like, my perspective is I always try to translate, okay, these revelations about theology, how do they impact the way I act in the world? And so, like, example, like my Platonic stuff about like forms and things like that, and trying to look more like spiritual and metaphysical and stuff. What that means is I generally like I implement that into my actions by trying to say, okay, I'm going to be less concerned about the temporal aspects of my life and focus more on spiritual aspects, and like focus on activities that fulfill me spiritually rather than temporally. So like the idea is like, and like the biggest way that has happened is like literally this project where it's like, okay, I can sit around and play video games all day and be content because video games just satisfy my brain, It doesn't like make it fulfill me spiritually anyway, just satisfying. It's fun, But like this video project I'm doing, it satisfies my creativity. It satisfies spiritual aspects of my being that make me feel much more fulfilled and happy than winning any video game,
Yeah. I think I have a more precise definition of what I'm trying to do. I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put forward arguments that are aware of people's experiences. So I think a lot of times people put forward arguments that are unaware of what the other side's experiences actually are. And so what I mean by that is, like, let's say, I don't know, let's say I'm walking down the street and I hear a fight in one of the apartments next door, right? And let's say for some reason I can go up to the couple and I can say something nice and abstract about how, like, come on guys, monkeys get into fights with each other because, like, can't you guys live in the same box together without getting into a fight? Like, we can do better than the monkeys. I can say something nice and abstract, but at the end of the day, I don't know anything about their situation.
Yeah.
So I can say something nice and abstract.
Because then one of them's going to go, but that person did X, Y, and Z, and then but that person did X, Y, and Z.
Not only did they do that, here's the facts, and here's how I personally interpreted the facts, and you're not grappling with that at that level, and that's what I mean when I want to talk about politics and religion in a way that's philosophical, but also that's aware of the other's experiences. Where it's like I would rather philosophize. Like, I don't care so much about the universe being finite and the universe requiring a first cause. I don't care so much about that. The reason I don't care about it is because religious people aren't religious because they meditated upon the finitude of the universe. I think I said this earlier, not to repeat myself, but I'd rather philosophize about why are religious people actually religious, and are those reasons good reasons? Like, that's what I'd rather philosophize about.
Yeah.
I want to philosophize and I want to argue in a way that's aware of people's experiences. Because I could sit in my armchair and spin together airtight arguments that completely ignore people's lived experiences. And I think I've done that. Like, I've done that before. Like, I've recited arguments to people. Like, I've recited philosophy. And it was just such a dead end that it turned me off of that whole project. Like, that's a ramble. But
I totally get it, though. It's one of those things where it's like, we can sit in our ivory tower all day arguing this stuff, but if nothing happens as a result of it, it's all meaningless.
Yeah,
Like,
and then the question is, so what distinguishes the conversations that seem meaningless from the conversations that seem meaningful? And that's my answer is, is your argumentation, is your line of reasoning actually aware of what the alternatives are? And what people's experiences are? That's what distinguishes the good conversations from the bad ones from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
We totally lost our other train of thought, and that's perfectly acceptable. We're about 3 hours deep right here.
Yeah. I think we could probably just up. Like, I still got some stogie time left, so
yeah,
we can still chill. But like, my brain's a little
fried,
frazzled,
a little fuegoed. Yeah. Your brain's looking like the hot end of that stogie. Mine is too. Yep, that's me. All right, I'm gonna stop recording.